Chapter 1, Blood and Seconds. The air in the Uchiha compound always smelled faintly of charcoal and sweet river reeds. Tonight, it smelled like iron. Ren sat cross-legged on the tatami mat of his bedroom, his breathing shallow. He was not originally from this world. In his past life, he had been an ordinary man, but a sudden twist of fate had reborn him into the tragic, doomed Uchiha clan. For 15 years, he had trained, blended in, and desperately hoped that his presence would alter the trajectory of the story. He had been wrong. The plot of Naruto was a crushing, unforgiving wheel, and tonight was the night it rolled over his family. Ding. A crisp, mechanical chime echoed directly inside his brain. System announcement: the Uchiha tragedy has commenced. Mission objective: survive the night of the massacre. Starter gift box issued, 1x, mass time rewind card, one-time use. Rewinds global time by exactly 60 minutes. Ren's eyes went wide. A system. It had remained completely silent for 15 years, acting as nothing more than a passive status bar, only to wake up at the exact moment the world turned into a slaughterhouse. Before he could process the notification, a sharp, choked gasp cut through the thin paper walls of his home. Ren, run. It was his mother's voice. Ren threw himself forward, sliding the shoji screen open so hard it tore from its wooden tracks. The hallway was dimly lit by a single flickering candle. In the shadows, his father, a proud Uchiha Chunin, lay slumped against the wall. A clean, precise slit severed his throat. His mother was on her knees, clutching her chest where a crimson stain was rapidly expanding across her yukata. Standing over them was a figure clad in a dark cloak, wearing a porcelain mask painted with the stylized markings of a crow. A sleek, curved katana dripped dark droplets onto the polished wooden floor. Itachi Uchiha, the cold detachment radiating from Itachi was suffocating. He didn't say a word. He simply raised his blade, his three-tomo Sharingan spinning slowly in the dim light, preparing to silence Ren. No, Ren roared. An explosive surge of agony erupted behind Ren's eyes. It felt as if liquid fire was being injected directly into his optic nerves. The sheer, unadulterated trauma of seeing his parents murdered triggered a violent eruption of chakra. His standard black irises flushed blood red. The three traditional tomo appeared, spun furiously, and then elongated, bleeding into one another until they formed a terrifying, jagged four-point star pattern, the Mangekyo Sharingan. Instantly, a flood of instinctual knowledge poured into Ren's mind. He knew his eyes. He understood their names, their weights, and their terrible prices. Left eye Kamui-derived space-time distortion, right eye Chronos stop. Itachi's blade descended, cutting through the air with lethal, silent speed. Chronos stop. Ren screamed in his mind. Snap, the universe slammed to a violent, absolute halt. The flickering candle flame froze into a solid, jagged shard of orange light. The blood dripping from Itachi's sword hovered in midair, suspended like tiny glass beads. Itachi himself was frozen mid-swing, his cloak locked in a dynamic, wind-blown ripple. Ren gasped, coughing up a mouthful of blood. The strain on his chakra network was immense, a heavy toll extracting a massive price for defying physics. He had 5 seconds, he didn't waste them trying to attack Itachi. He knew he lacked the raw combat experience to kill a prodigy in 5 seconds. Instead, Ren leapt backward, utilizing his left eye. The space around his body spiraled inward like a whirlpool, pulling him out of the room and into the dimensional void. Tick. The 5 seconds ended. Time snapped back into motion. Itachi's blade cleaved empty air, striking the floorboards where Ren had stood a millisecond prior. The Anbu prodigy paused, his Sharingan narrowing as he scanned the empty room. There was no corpse. There was no trace of chakra. Ren had vanished from the face of the earth, a quarter-mile away, space distorted outside the Uchiha clan head's estate. Ren tumbled out of the spatial vortex, collapsing onto his hands and knees on a tiled rooftop. Blood poured freely from both of his eyes, staining his cheeks in macabre tracks. Damn it, Ren hissed, clutching his face. His vision was already slightly blurry. The Mangekyo was a curse that demanded blindness as payment for its godlike power. He looked down at the main estate. The silence hanging over the compound was unnatural, heavy, and suffocating. Ren rushed toward the main hall, hoping against hope that he could change things, that he could rally Fugaku, but as he slipped through the shadows of the compound, the true scale of the horror unveiled itself. He passed the training grounds. 3 Uchiha teenagers, boys he had sparred with just days ago, lay piled on top of one another, their throats cut cleanly. He passed the civilian sector. An elderly Uchiha grandmother who sold sweet bean cakes sat propped against her shop door, her lifeless eyes staring blankly at the moon. It wasn't just Itachi. Ren caught a glimpse of a swirling orange mask in the distance, Obito Uchiha, moving like a phantom, reaping lives with terrifying efficiency. By the time Ren reached the steps of the clan head's manor, his heart was a block of ice. He stepped through the heavy wooden doors. The scent of blood here was thick enough to taste. In the center of the main tatami room, Fugaku Uchiha and Makoto Uchiha sat side by side. Their backs were turned to the door. Standing behind them, his sword trembling only slightly, was Itachi. Do not hesitate, Itachi, Fugaku's voice echoed, calm, heavy, and accepting. Compared to you, our pain will only last for an instant. Even if our philosophies differ. I am proud of you. You are truly a kind child. Father. Mother. Itachi choked out, tears streaming down his face beneath his mask. Take care of Sasuke, Makoto whispered. Ren stood frozen in the doorway. He wanted to scream. He wanted to use his time stop to rush in and save them. But a cold, calculating realization slammed into his brain, halting his steps. If I save Fugaku, what happens tomorrow? The thought was venomous, but logical. Fugaku was a pacifist at heart. He was weak-willed, torn between his clan's anger and his loyalty to Konoha. If Fugaku lived, he would try to negotiate with Hiruzen Sarutobi. He would bow his head. He would allow Danzo to step all over the Uchiha name to maintain a fragile, humiliating peace. If Ren wanted to destroy the corrupt system of Konoha, if he wanted to punish the elders who forced this tragedy to happen, Fugaku could not be the leader. The Uchiha did not need a diplomat. They needed an absolute dictator. They needed an overlord. Ren watched silently, hiding his chakra, as Itachi's blade cut down his own parents. The bodies slumped forward. Itachi fell to his knees, sobbing in the quiet room. Ren looked up at the moon, his teeth grinding together until they bled. The horror of the night had stripped away his remaining naivety. He was a transmigrator, armed with the ultimate script of this world, and he had just let his clan's leader die for the sake of future power. The guilt was a heavy weight, but it forged his resolve into steel. It's time, Ren thought, his bloodshot Mangekyo gleaming in the dark. He pulled up the digital blue interface of his system. Item inventory, 1x, mass time rewind card. Description, activates an absolute localized temporal reversal of 60 minutes. All physical states, lives, and damage will be undone. The user retains all memories, injuries, and newly awakened abilities. Mangekyo Sharingan. System, Ren whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of dread and dark anticipation. Activate the time rewind card. Command received. Activating, mass time rewind. The world around Ren shattered like a pane of glass. The crimson blood on the floor began to flow upward, seeping back into the wounds of Fugaku and Makoto. The sound of Itachi's quiet sobs reversed into a sharp intake of breath. The moon sped backward across the sky. The wind blew in reverse, and the shattered pieces of Ren's reality pieced themselves back together, second by second, minute by minute. Ren felt his body being pulled backward through a chaotic tunnel of light. The agonizing pain in his eyes remained, a burning reminder that what he had experienced was entirely real. His Mangekyo Sharingan remained active, spinning silently in the temporal vortex. 60 minutes, Ren thought as the darkness claimed his consciousness. I have exactly 1 hour to change the fate of the Uchiha. But this time, it will be on my terms. Chapter 1, Blood and Seconds. The air in the Uchiha compound smelled of fresh iron and burning wood. Ren lay flat on his back in the dirt, staring blankly up at the full moon. He was a transmigrator, reborn into this world 15 years ago. For over a decade, he had trained in secret, hoping to change the dark fate of the Uchiha clan. He had failed. All around him lay the bodies of his kin. The massacre was over. The screams had faded into a deafening, suffocating silence. Ren himself had been cut down by Itachi, left to bleed out in a ditch like a dog. He had been too weak. Too slow. As his vision began to blur into final darkness, a cold, mechanical voice chimed directly inside his brain. System status, death imminent. Host soul metamorphosis triggered. Condition met, absolute despair. Awakening ultimate bloodline. An explosive surge of agony erupted behind Ren's eyes. It felt as if liquid fire was being injected directly into his optic nerves. His standard black irises flushed blood red. The three traditional tomo appeared, spun furiously, and then elongated, bleeding into one another until they formed a terrifying, jagged 4-point star pattern. The Mangekyo Sharingan. Instantly, a flood of instinctual knowledge poured into Ren's mind. He knew his eyes. He understood their names, their weights, and their terrible prices. Left eye, Kamui-derived space-time distortion, intangibility and void. Right eye, Chronos stop time pause. System announcement, first time awakening reward issued. Item obtained, 1x, mass time rewind card, one-time use. Rewinds global time by exactly 60 minutes. All physical states, lives, and damage will be undone. Dead targets are resurrected at their starting positions. Ren's blood-stained lips curled into a manic, predatory smile. A rewind card. Before he could activate it, a heavy footstep crunched on the gravel nearby. Ren immediately suppressed his chakra and feigned death, closing his eyes to tiny slits. Through the darkness, a shadowy figure approached. It was Danzo Shimura, flanked by 3 elite Root Anbu operatives. Danzo looked down at Ren's corpse, his face devoid of emotion. Another waste of good eyes, Danzo muttered, kneeling beside Ren. He drew a sterile, curved scalpel. The Uchiha were a disease, but their lineage will serve Konoha well in my hands. With ruthless efficiency, Danzo plunged his fingers toward Ren's left eye socket. Ren felt the agonizing rip as Danzo physically dug out his newly awakened Mangekyo Sharingan. The pain was blinding, but Ren did not make a sound. He held his breath, letting Danzo place the bloody eye carefully into a preservation scroll. Secure the rest of the perimeter, Danzo ordered his men, wiping the blood from his hands. Leave no stone unturned. Collect every viable Sharingan. Ren opened his remaining eye, staring at Danzo's back with pure, unadulterated venom. You want our eyes, Danzo? Let's see you hold onto them. System, Ren roared in his mind. Activate the time rewind card. Command received. Activating, mass time rewind. The world around Ren shattered like a pane of glass, the moon sped backward across the sky. The blood on the dirt flowed upward, seeping back into the wounds of the fallen. But because Ren was the anchor of the system, he did not lose his position. Danzo, who had just turned to walk away, suddenly felt the world warp. The temporal reversal slammed into the physical plane. Right in Danzo's hands, the preservation scroll began to glow. The bloody Uchiha eye he had just stolen dissolved into a mist of light, flowing backward through the air. What? Danzo gasped, his eyes widening in rare, genuine panic. He looked down at his hands. The blood on his fingers was vanishing. The scroll was empty. A quarter-mile away, the hundreds of Uchiha corpses lying in the streets suddenly twitched. Their severed throats closed. Their shattered hearts beat again. The entire Uchiha clan was snatched from the jaws of death, opening their eyes in their respective homes, completely healed but profoundly confused. Only 2 people remained dead, Fugaku and Makoto Uchiha. Ren had consciously willed the system to exclude them from the resurrection. Fugaku's weak, passive leadership would only hinder the clan's survival. The Uchiha did not need a diplomat anymore, they needed a tyrant. Looking for this. A cold, mocking voice echoed from the shadows. Danzo spun around. Standing there, completely healed, with both eyes perfectly intact, was Ren. His eyes were spinning in a terrifying, jagged 4-point star pattern. The air around him cracked with dense, suffocating chakra. You were dead. Danzo hissed, his calm demeanor entirely shattering. What genjutsu is this? This isn't a genjutsu, Danzo. This is reality, Ren whispered. Kill him. Danzo roared, stepping back. The 3 Root Anbu leapt forward, drawing their ninjutsu, channeling wind chakra into their blades. They closed the distance in a fraction of a second. Chronos stop. Ren muttered, snap, the universe slammed to a violent, absolute halt. The 3 Anbu were frozen midair, their blades hovering inches from Ren's face. The dust particles in the air locked in place. Ren walked calmly past the frozen blades. He didn't have much time, only 5 seconds. He stopped right in front of the frozen Danzo. With a casual flick of his wrist, Ren channeled fire chakra into his fist and punched Danzo squarely in the chest, shattering his ribs and rupturing his lungs. Tick. The 5 seconds ended. Time snapped back, boom. Danzo exploded backward, vomiting a massive torrent of blood as he crashed through 3 stone walls, collapsing into a heap of rubble. The 3 Anbu struck empty air, stumbling in absolute shock as they realized Ren was suddenly standing behind them. Before they could react, the space around them distorted. Ren's left eye spiraled. Kamui. A violent spatial vortex swallowed the 3 Anbu whole, crushing their bodies and ripping them into the dimensional void. They vanished without even a chance to scream. Ren walked slowly toward the coughing, bleeding Danzo. He lifted Danzo by his throat, his Mangekyo Sharingan burning into the old man's terrified eyes. Listen to me carefully, you old dog, Ren whispered, his voice dripping with malice. Tonight, Itachi Uchiha went mad. He killed the clan head and his wife. He tried to slaughter the rest of us, but I stopped him. I saved my clan. If a single root member steps into our compound again, I will walk into your bedroom and erase you from existence. Do you understand? Danzo, clutching his shattered chest, could only nod in sheer terror. He had never encountered a power that could stop time itself. The next morning, the public execution's sun rose over Konoha, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. The news had spread like wildfire. The Uchiha clan had been attacked in the night. Fugaku and Makoto were dead. In the center of the village square, a massive crowd had gathered. Civilian families, shinobi, and the third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, stood in shock. In the middle of the square stood the surviving Uchiha clan, numbering in the hundreds, all standing tall and fierce behind their new leader. Ren stood at the front, clad in a traditional black Uchiha battle mantle. At his feet, bound in heavy, chakra-suppressing chains, was a bruised and terrified Sasuke Uchiha. Ren, what is the meaning of this? Hiruzen Sarutobi demanded, stepping forward with his staff. Why is Sasuke in chains? He is just a child. Ren looked down at the Hokage, his Mangekyo Sharingan spinning openly for the entire village to see. The crowd gasped at the sight of the legendary eyes. Yesterday, a traitor emerged from our midst. Ren's voice boomed across the square, carrying immense authority. Itachi Uchiha butchered our clan head, Fugaku, and his wife, Makoto. He attempted a total massacre of our people to weaken Konoha's military might. The crowd murmured in horror. But Itachi did not act alone, Ren continued, pointing a cold finger down at Sasuke. This boy, Sasuke Uchiha, was his inside informant. He provided Itachi with the patrol schedules, the weak points in our defenses, and the locations of our civilian sectors. He conspired with a rogue criminal to wipe out his own bloodline. No, that's a lie. I didn't do anything. Sasuke screamed, tears streaming down his face as he thrashed against the chains. Itachi did it. I didn't know anything. Lord Third, help me. Hiruzen stepped forward, his face pale. Ren, there is no proof of this. Sasuke loved his parents. Proof. Ren laughed coldly. He reached into his vest and tossed a forged, blood-stained scroll onto the dirt in front of Hiruzen. We found this in Sasuke's room. Written in Itachi's handwriting, detailing the plans. The Uchiha clan will no longer tolerate traitors. The sins of the family must be washed in blood. The surrounding Uchiha clan members, still traumatized by the memory of waking up in pools of their own blood before the rewind, roared in agreement. Kill the traitor. Kill him. Ren, stop. As Hokage, I command you, Hiruzen began, drawing his staff. Before Hiruzen could finish his sentence, Ren's right eye flashed. Chronos, stop. The entire world froze. Hiruzen was stuck mid-stride. The wind died. Sasuke's tears hung motionless on his cheeks. In the frozen world, Ren calmly walked over to Sasuke. He drew a sleek, black kunai. With a precise, unblinking gaze, Ren drove the blade straight through Sasuke's heart. He stepped back and snapped his fingers. Time resumed. Spurt. A fountain of crimson blood erupted from Sasuke's chest. His eyes went wide, the light rapidly draining from them as he collapsed into the dirt, dead in front of the entire village. The crowd shrieked in absolute horror. Hiruzen gasped, falling back a step, completely unable to understand how Ren had moved so fast that even his Hokage-level reflexes couldn't track it. Ren stood over Sasuke's corpse, looking up at the Hokage and the terrified villagers. Itachi Uchiha wanted to play the villain, Ren said, his voice echoing with chilling finality. Let him. But he should know. Every time he cuts a branch of this village, the Uchiha will cut his roots. From this day forward, I am the patriarch of the Uchiha. And Konoha will learn to watch its step. Chapter 2, The Shattered Mirror. The rainfall outside the abandoned temple in the Land of Fire fell in heavy, rhythmic sheets, masking the sound of the world. Inside, the air was damp and smelled of decay. Itachi Uchiha sat cross-legged on a stone dais, his Akatsuki cloak draped loosely over his shoulders. His eyes were closed, his breathing slow. The emotional toll of the previous night had carved deep lines into his young face. He had butchered his kin. He had buried his blade into his parents' flesh. He had become a monster in the eyes of history, all to ensure that the Uchiha name died with honor, and more importantly, to ensure that his precious little brother, Sasuke, would live. As long as Sasuke survives, my sin has meaning, Itachi thought, a solitary tear sliding down his pale cheek. Suddenly, the space in the corner of the temple distorted. A swirling vortex materialized from nothingness, and a figure stepped out. It was Obito Uchiha, masked in his orange swirl, his single Sharingan gleaming through the eyehole. Itachi didn't open his eyes. You're late, Madara. Is the Leaf Village secure? Has Danzo kept his word regarding Sasuke? Obito did not answer immediately. He stood entirely still, an aura of profound disbelief and confusion radiating from his body. When he finally spoke, his voice lacked its usual mocking, playful cadence. It was raw and deeply unsettled. Itachi. Something went wrong. Something impossible. Itachi's eyes snapped open. The three-tomo Sharingan spun instantly into the intricate, curved design of his Mangekyo. A cold dread gripped his chest. What do you mean? Did Danzo break the treaty? Did he touch Sasuke? No, Obito said, shaking his head slowly. Danzo didn't touch him. Danzo is currently bedridden in the hospital, fighting for his life with a shattered chest and ruptured lungs. Itachi stood up, his chakra flaring instinctively. Explain. Who could have done that to Danzo inside the village? I don't know, Obito muttered, his voice trembling slightly. But that isn't the worst of it. The Uchiha clan. They aren't dead. The silence that followed was absolute. The sound of the rain outside seemed to vanish. Itachi stared at the masked man as if he were speaking a foreign language. What kind of joke is this? Itachi's voice dropped to a deadly, quiet whisper. I killed them myself. I watched their blood pool on the tatami mats. I felt their heartbeats stop. Every single one of them. Do not play games with me. I am not playing, Obito hissed, stepping closer. I went back to the compound to check the perimeter. The streets are clean. The houses are full. Yashira, Anabi, Tekka, the men we slaughtered with our own hands, are walking the streets. They are alive, Itachi. Their wounds are gone. It's as if the massacre never happened. Itachi's mind reeled. His legendary intellect, usually capable of dissecting complex tactical situations in milliseconds, completely stalled. It was impossible. A genjutsu of that scale. No, a Zanagi could alter reality for a single person at the cost of an eye, but it could not resurrect an entire clan of hundreds. Who? Itachi choked out, his chest tightening. Who did this? A kid named Ren Uchiha, Obito replied. He somehow awakened the Mangekyo Sharingan last night. According to my spies en route, he confronted Danzo in the dark, obliterated his guards, and nearly beat Danzo to death. He claimed he stopped the massacre. And the clan. They have elected him as the new patriarch. Itachi took a sharp breath. Ren. He remembered the boy. A quiet chunin who kept to himself, never showing any exceptional talent. How could a hidden dragon like that exist within the clan without anyone noticing? But a sudden, terrifying realization slammed into Itachi's mind like a physical blow. If the clan was alive, if Ren had taken over, what happened to the narrative? What happened to the deal he made with the third Hokage? Where is Sasuke? Itachi demanded, his voice cracking with an emotion he rarely showed. If the clan is alive, where is my brother? Did Ren protect him? Obito stayed silent for a long, agonizing moment. He looked away, his single eye staring at the crumbling stone floor. Madara, answer me. Itachi roared, stepping forward and grabbing the collar of Obito's cloak. The sheer intensity of his chakra caused the stone floor beneath them to crack. Where is Sasuke? Sasuke is dead, Itachi. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Itachi froze. His grip on Obito's cloak loosened, his hands dropping to his sides. What did you say? This morning, in the middle of the village square, in front of the third Hokage, the elders, and hundreds of civilians, Ren Uchiha held a public trial, Obito explained, his voice low. He produced a forged scroll, claiming Sasuke was your inside informant. He accused Sasuke of treason against the clan, claiming the boy helped you plan the massacre. No, 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 Itachi whispered, his vision blurring. A violent, agonizing pain erupted behind his eyes. The third Hokage tried to stop it, Obito continued ruthlessly. But Ren. He possesses a power I have never seen before. In a literal blink of an eye, without anyone seeing him move, he drove a kunai straight through Sasuke's heart. He executed him publicly. Sasuke died screaming his innocence, branded a traitor by his own bloodline. Boom. A massive, crimson ribcage of ethereal chakra erupted from Itachi's body, shattering the roof of the temple. The Susanoo flared to life, driven by a wave of pure, unadulterated rage and grief. Blood began to pour freely from Itachi's left eye, running down his pale cheek like a river of gore. Ren. Itachi screamed, a sound so primal and filled with agony that it echoed across the entire valley, the illusion of his calm, calculating persona completely disintegrated. The brother he had sacrificed his soul for, the boy he had traded his honor, his family, and his future to protect, was dead. Slaughtered by the very clan Itachi had tried to erase. Slain by a monster named Ren in front of the entire world, his name dragged through the mud as a traitor, everything Itachi had done was for nothing. His sacrifice was a joke. His life was a hollow, empty shell. I will kill him, Itachi hissed, his teeth grinding together until they cracked. The crimson Susanoo manifested an ethereal blade, vibrating with destructive chakra. I will tear Konoha apart. I will slaughter every single Uchiha until nothing but ash remains. I will gouge Ren's eyes out with my bare hands. He turned to leap out of the temple, his mind completely consumed by madness. He didn't care about peace anymore. He didn't care about the village. The tether that kept him sane had been brutally snapped. Stop, Itachi! Obito yelled, using Kamui to appear directly in front of him. If you go back there now, you die. Ren's space-time abilities are terrifying. He defeated Danzo and 3 root elites without a single scratch. He executed Sasuke right in front of Hiruzen Sarutobi, and the Hokage couldn't even register his movements. You are blind with rage. You will fall right into his trap. Out of my way, Itachi snarled, the Suzanu's hand swinging wildly to crush Obito. Obito phased through the attack, his expression grim beneath his mask. Think for a second. Ren wants you to come back. By killing Sasuke, he has cut your only tie to Konoha. If you attack the village now, you prove his lies right. You prove to the world that Sasuke really was your informant, and that you are seeking revenge for your failed coup. You will destroy your brother's memory forever. Those words struck Itachi like a bucket of ice water. The Susanoo flickered, its dense chakra wavering before slowly fading away. Itachi dropped to his knees, his hands planting into the dirt. He vomited a thick stream of blood, his chest heaving violently. Obito was right. If he rushed back to the village like a madman, he would validate Ren's narrative. The world would believe Sasuke was a traitor. Ren would use Itachi's rage to solidify the Uchiha's position as the victimized heroes of Konoha. He planned this. Itachi whispered, his voice trembling as he stared at the blood on his hands. He knew I would let my parents die. He knew I would leave Sasuke behind. He used my own plan against me to clear the Uchiha name and kill my brother. A profound, terrifying realization dawned on Itachi. Ren wasn't just a powerful shinobi, he was a demonic strategist. He had played Itachi like a fiddle, turning his ultimate sacrifice into a weapon to execute his own brother. Itachi raised his head. His Mangekyo Sharingan was spinning furiously, the blood tracks on his face drying into dark, macabre stains. The warmth in his eyes was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, abyssal void. Madara, Itachi said, his voice dropping back into a horrifyingly calm cadence. Tell the leader of Akatsuki. I am ready for any mission. I will gather the tailed beasts. I will obtain the power of the gods. He stood up, his Akatsuki cloak fluttering in the damp wind of the ruined temple. Let Ren rule his clan. Let him build his fortress, Itachi whispered, looking toward the direction of the Hidden Leaf village. I will let him taste a few years of peace. But I swear upon my brother's soul. I will return. And when I do, I will show Ren Uchiha what a true god of death looks like. Chapter 3, The Crown of Eternity. The heavy oak doors of the Uchiha Patriarch's estate slammed shut, sealing out the chaotic murmurs of the Hidden Leaf village. Inside the dimly lit study, Ren stood before a full-length mirror, slowly unlacing the black leather guards from his forearms. His breathing was steady, but his muscles ached with a deep, lingering exhaustion. The execution of Sasuke had been flawless, a cold masterclass in psychological warfare and absolute ruthlessness. By framing the boy as Itachi's inside informant, Ren had accomplished 3 things in a single stroke. He had completely severed Itachi's lingering loyalty to Konoha, forced the 3rd Hokage into a position where he couldn't legally retaliate, and solidified his own position as the absolute, undisputed tyrant of the Uchiha clan. Ren looked up, his reflection staring back at him. His eyes burned. The crimson irises were bloodshot, the jagged, 4-point star pattern of his Mangekyo Sharingan spinning weakly before fading back into standard black. He blinked, and a wave of gray, grainy blurriness washed over his vision. The price of godhood, Ren muttered, touching the edge of his eyelid. A faint trace of dried, metallic-smelling blood flaked off under his fingernail. Every single time he used Chrono's stop or his spatial distortion, the light in his eyes dimmed. The Mangekyo Sharingan was a tragic masterpiece of biology, a weapon designed to consume its user from the inside out, granting ultimate power only to pay for it with absolute blindness. In the original timeline, an Uchiha could only escape this curse by ripping the eyes out of their own sibling to awaken the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, but Ren was a transmigrator. And he had something far more dangerous than blood ties. Ding. The sharp crystalline chime of the Overlord System echoed within his mind, shattering the quiet of the room. System announcement, core fate divergence complete. Mission evaluation, the host has successfully prevented the Uchiha clan massacre, eliminated the hidden threat Sasuke Uchiha, and completely rewritten the political landscape of the Hidden Leaf. Calculated rating, SSS rank, flawless Overlord execution. A brilliant, electric blue interface manifested in the air before him, glowing with a soft, pulsing light that illuminated the dark corners of the study. Main quest completed. Reward issued, evolution template, the Crown of Eternity. Item obtained, 1x, Eternal Evolution Serum, system exclusive item. Purifies the host's current ocular bloodline, completely removing the side effects of blindness and evolving the Mangekyo into the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan without requiring a sibling transplant. Ren's chest tightened, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, without a brother, he had been facing a ticking clock. Every single use of his time stop was a step closer to darkness. But the system had just handed him the ultimate key to survival. System, Ren commanded, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. Administer the Eternal Evolution Serum. Command received. Commencing ocular subsystem evolution. Warning, the integration process will cause severe neural stimulation. Please brace yourself. Instantly, Ren's vision went pitch black. It wasn't the darkness of a closed room, it was an absolute, suffocating void. A split second later, a sensation akin to molten white phosphorus was injected directly into his brain through his optic nerves. Ren gasped, his knees buckling beneath him. He collapsed onto the polished wooden floor, his fingers clawing desperately into the tatami mats, tearing the woven straw to shreds. He wanted to scream, but the muscles in his throat were locked in a rigid, agonizing spasm. The chakra inside his body, usually a controlled, flowing river, turned into a raging torrent of liquid fire, violently expanding his chakra pathways. Deep within his mind, he could hear the cracking of cosmic glass. His left eye, the anchor of space-time distortion, began to pulse with a cold, abyssal energy. His right eye, the anchor of Chronos' stop, radiated a burning, golden heat that threatened to melt his skull. The two opposing forces collided in the center of his brain, tearing his old ocular templates apart and weaving them back together with threads of pure, unbreakable system energy. 10 seconds. 30 seconds. A minute. To Ren, it felt like an eternity spent in the deepest pits of purgatory. The blood vessels in his eyes ruptured, pouring thick, dark crimson down his cheeks, pooling on the floorboards beneath him. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the agony vanished. A profound, unnatural coolness washed over his face, soothing the burning nerves. The chaotic, thrashing chakra inside his body calmed down, settling into a dense, incredibly deep ocean of energy that felt 10 times larger than his previous reserves. Ocular evolution complete. Congratulations to the host for awakening, the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. Ocular abilities optimized, the chakra cost for Chronos stop, and spatial distortion, has been reduced by 50%. The side effect of visual degradation has been permanently deleted. Ren slowly pushed himself up from the floor, wiping the fresh blood from his face with the back of his hand. He opened his eyes, the world had completely changed, the grainy, blurred edges of his vision were entirely gone. Every single detail in the room was sharp, vibrant, and hyper-realistic. He could see the individual dust motes drifting in the dim moonlight. He could read the tiny, faded ink characters on the scrolls stacked across the room without even focusing. He walked back over to the mirror and looked up. His eyes were no longer the simple 4-point star. The original design had evolved, growing incredibly complex. The sharp, jagged star was now encircled by a thick, dark ring of interlocking crimson blades, with 3 curved, elegant commas sweeping outward from the center like a galaxy of blood. The eyes did not just look powerful, they looked ancient, authoritative, and utterly terrifying. Ren blinked, and the pattern remained perfectly clear, vibrant, and completely free of pain. Unlimited use. Ren whispered, a dark, dangerous smile slowly spreading across his face. No more blindness. No more limits. With the Eternal Mangekyo active, he no longer had to conserve his strength. He could deploy his time manipulation and space warping abilities with impunity. The Hidden Leaf Village had thought they were dealing with a temporary prodigy who would eventually burn out. They had no idea they were looking at an eternal monster. Ding. The system interface flashed again, the blue light turning into a deep, ominous crimson. New main quest triggered, the annihilation of the Konoha 4. Quest description, the tragedy of the Uchiha clan was orchestrated from the shadows by the executive leadership of Konoha. To secure absolute dominance and avenge the bloodline, the host must systematically dismantle and erase the 4 founding elder clans, Sarutobi, Shimura, Mitokado, Udatain, without leaving any physical or chakra-based evidence pointing back to the Uchiha. Target 1, the Shimura clan, Danzo's bloodline and root assets. Time limit 30 days. Reward upon completion, high-tier wood style, Mokuden, bloodline template. Ren's smile widened, his teeth gleaming in the darkness. Wood style. The perfect camouflage. If the leader of the Uchiha starts using the first Hokage's legendary technique, the entire political system of this village will collapse from sheer paranoia. He deactivated his eyes, letting them slip back into the calm, deceptively ordinary black of a civilian. The secret war had officially begun. Danzo was currently broken and bedridden in the Konoha hospital, guarded by the highest tier of root and regular Anbu operatives. The old dog would think he was safe behind the village's heavy security, waiting to recover so he could plot his next move. Ren walked over to the window, pushing it open to let the cool night air wash over his face. In the distance, the Grand Hokage monument loomed over the village, the stone faces of the past leaders staring blankly into the dark. Enjoy your remaining days, old men, Ren whispered into the wind, his hand gripping the windowsill until the wood cracked under his fingers. You forced Itachi to murder his own blood. You tried to turn my family into a harvest of eyes. Now, I am going to tear your legacies out by the roots, and I will do it while you smile and thank me for my loyalty. He stepped back into the shadows of the room. The space around his body began to ripple, twisting into a violent, silent vortex. Within a fraction of a second, the room was completely empty, leaving behind nothing but the faint scent of iron and the quiet rustle of the wind. Chapter 4: The Tongwell is corrupt. The subterranean base of Root was a tomb built of cold concrete and buried secrets. Deep beneath the bustling streets of Konoha, it existed outside the jurisdiction of the Hokage, answering only to the whim of Danzo Shimura. In the center of a dimly lit tactical room stood Commander Yamanaka, one of Danzo's most lethal and trusted Root captains. He was checking a manifestation ledger of hidden weapon caches when the single candle illuminating his desk flickered, its orange flame freezing into a solid, jagged shard of static light. The dust motes hovering in the damp air stopped dead. Snap, Ren materialized directly behind the captain. He didn't use a blade, he simply extended his hand, channeling a concentrated burst of lightning-infused chakra directly into the base of the captain's skull. The high-voltage current fried the man's brain stem instantly, bypassing his nervous system before he could even register a thought tick. The 5 seconds of Chrono's stop expired, time snapped back into motion. Commander Yamanaka collapsed forward onto his desk without a single sound, his heart stopping mid-beat. No blood was spilled. No chakra residue was left behind to trace. Ren stared coldly at the corpse, his Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan spinning silently in the dark. Over the past 3 nights, he had repeated this exact assassination 4 times, silently putting down the top command structure of Danzo's private army. System alert, core Root captains eliminated, 4 quarters. Database unlocked, advanced Fuinjutsu, the structure of the tongue-cursed sealing jutsu, tongue-tooth bite seal. A blueprint of glowing blue ink manifested in Ren's mind, mapping out the intricate chakra network of Danzo's famous gag order seal. It was a vicious curse branded onto the tongues of all Root members, paralyzing their bodies if they ever attempted to speak a word about Danzo's Black Ops missions or illegal biological experiments. So this is how you kept your leash on them, Danzo, Ren muttered, his lips curling into a predatory smile. Let's see how your leash holds when I snap the collar. The next morning, the central plaza of Konoha was packed to the brim. Word had been leaked through anonymous Uchiha merchant networks that the new patriarch would be making a grand presentation regarding village safety. Following the rogue attack by Itachi, Hiruzen Sarutobi stood on the balcony of the Hokage administrative building, flanked by his personal Anbu guards and the remaining 2 council elders, Homura Mitokado and Kaharu Udatane. Their faces were grim. Danzo was still bedridden in the hospital, his condition critical, leaving the 3 of them to manage a deeply unstable political climate. The Uchiha are gathering too much public attention, Homura hissed, leaning heavily on his cane. Ren is young, but his execution of Sasuke showed a dangerous level of decisiveness. We should have locked down the compound. On what grounds, Homura? Hiruzen sighed, looking older than his years. He protected his clan from a mass murderer. He executed a traitor based on evidence. If we move against them now, we invite a civil war we cannot afford. Down in the crowded square, the sea of civilians and shinobi suddenly parted. Ren walked into the center of the plaza. He wasn't dressed in standard shinobi gear, he wore the heavy, high-collared black mantle of the Uchiha patriarch, embroidered with a silver fan across the back. Behind him marched a squad of elite Uchiha forces, dragging 3 bound, masked figures clad in gray flak jackets. The crowd gasped. The 3 prisoners wore the distinctive porcelain masks of the Anbu, but their gear lacked the official insignia of the Hokage's personal guard. Lord Hokage. Elders of Konoha. Ren's voice boomed across the plaza, perfectly channeled with chakra to ensure every single person in the vicinity heard him. I come before you today not to cause conflict, but to expose a cancerous growth that threatens the very foundation of our beloved village. Hiruzen's eyes narrowed. He gripped the railing of the balcony. Ren Uchiha. What is the meaning of this? Who are those prisoners? These men are shinobi of the Leaf, Lord Third, Ren shouted back, his expression a mask of righteous indignation. But they do not serve you. They do not serve the people. Last night, my clan guards caught these 3 attempting to infiltrate the Uchiha civilian sector to steal the bodies of our fallen elders. They belong to an illegal, rogue organization operating under our very feet. Rogue. Kaharu stepped forward, her voice shrill. Nonsense. All Anbu report directly to the Hokage office. Is that so? Ren mocked, a cold glint in his eyes. He stepped toward the first prisoner, violently ripping the porcelain mask from the man's face. Then perhaps you can explain why this man, a registered Leaf Chunin who officially died on a mission 3 years ago, is operating a shadow facility beneath the training grounds. The crowd murmured in shock. Several shinobi in the audience recognized the unmasked face. Hey, isn't that Hyuga's branch family member? No, look at his forehead, he's from a minor clan. Silence. Ren roared, cutting through the chatter. The truth is far worse. These men are victims of a monstrous tyrant. They cannot speak the truth to you, Lord Hokage, because their very bodies have been enslaved by a forbidden sealing jutsu. Ren gripped the jaw of the unmasked root member, forcing his mouth wide open. He pointed a finger directly at the man's tongue. Using his sensory chakra, Ren projected a localized illusion, a standard trick of the Sharingan, magnifying the image of the man's tongue so the entire crowd could see it. Marked deep into the flesh was a black, geometric seal that resembled a twisted insect claw. The tongue-cursed sealing jutsu, Ren announced, his voice dripping with venom. A forbidden brand created by Danzo Shimura. If any of these men attempt to speak Danzo's name, or reveal the atrocities committed by his shadow group, Root, this seal paralyzes their nervous system, suffocating them to death. A collective gasp of horror echoed through the civilian crowd. The idea of a village elder branding his own loyal shinobi like cattle, stripping away their free will, was an absolute abomination to the concept of the will of fire. On the balcony, Hiruzen's face turned completely pale. He had known about the existence of the seal, but he had turned a blind eye to it for decades under the guise of necessary darkness. To have it dragged into the blinding light of the public square was a political catastrophe. Ren Uchiha, this is an internal military matter. Homura shouted, his face flushed with panic. Hand the prisoners over to the administrative office immediately. Hand them over so they can be silenced permanently. Ren laughed coldly, his voice echoing with absolute authority. No. The Uchiha clan stands for justice. The system of this village is built on trust, and today, I will free these men from their slavery. I will show you that no shadow can withstand the light of the Uchiha. Ren stepped back, his black eyes instantly flushing blood red, spinning into the terrifying, blade-encircled galaxy pattern of his Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. The crowd fell completely silent at the sight of those eyes. The sheer pressure of his chakra caused the gravel on the ground to vibrate. With the ancient knowledge passed down through the sacred Uchiha tablets, Ren lied smoothly, constructing a perfect narrative for his system-derived skills. I will dismantle this corrupt brand. Ren formed 3 rapid hand signs, ram, snake, bird. He slammed his palm directly against the first root member's chest. Fuinjutsu, abyssal unraveling. A surge of brilliant, blue-white chakra erupted from Ren's fingertips, flowing up the prisoner's neck and directly into his mouth. The system's precise knowledge allowed Ren to target the exact anchor points of Danzo's seal. To the audience, it looked like a miracle. The black geometric ink on the man's tongue began to violently smoke, turning into a gray ash before flaking away entirely into the wind. The prisoner gasped, his eyes widening in pure shock. For the first time in 10 years, the heavy, suffocating weight on his soul was gone. He could feel his tongue again. Ren did not stop. In a flash of incredible speed, he repeated the process on the other 2 prisoners, shattering Danzo's ultimate hold over them within seconds. The 3 root members fell to their knees, weeping openly, staring at their hands in utter disbelief. You are free, Ren whispered down to them, his voice carrying a subtle hint of Sharingan hypnosis to guide their next actions. Speak the truth to your village. Who orders the assassinations? Who hoards the wealth? Who forced the Uchiha into a corner? The first unmasked prisoner looked up at the Hokage balcony, his voice trembling but clear. It was Lord Danzo. He ordered us to assassinate the Uchiha elders. He ordered us to collect their eyes for his private collection. He told us the Hokage approved of it. He lies. Kaharu shrieked, her hands shaking, but it was too late. The civilian crowd erupted into a frenzy of anger and panic. Shinobi from various minor clans began to shout, demanding answers from the third Hokage. The pristine, holy reputation of the Konoha elders was shattered in a single morning. Ren stood in the center of the storm, his black mantle fluttering in the wind, his Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan burning brightly. He didn't look at the screaming crowd. He looked directly up at Hiruzen Sarutobi, his gaze cold, mocking, and victorious. One down, Ren thought, his mind already shifting to the next phase of his grand design. Your shadow is gone, Hiruzen. Now, let's see how long you can survive in the sun. Chapter 5, The Unmasking of a Ghoul. The central plaza of Konoha was no longer a public square, it had become an open-air courtroom of pure fury. The confession of the freed root shinobi hung in the morning air like thick smoke, suffocating the authority of the Hokage balcony. Civilians pressed against the perimeter fences, their voices rising in a volatile tide of confusion and anger. Ren stood perfectly still at the center of the chaos, his black mantle casting a long, imposing shadow across the dirt. His Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan spun in slow, hypnotic rotations, reflecting the bright morning sun. Silence. Ren's voice split the air, imbued with a sharp spike of chakra that instantly brought a tense, ringing quiet to the plaza. He looked up at the Hokage administrative balcony, his gaze locking directly onto the pale, sweating face of Hiruzen Sarutobi. The confession of these freed men is merely the tip of the iceberg, Lord Third, Ren announced, his tone shifting from righteous anger to a chilling, measured certainty. For years, our people have gone missing. For years, the Uchiha clan has been pushed to the margins of this village, accused of treason and instability. But the true traitor sits in your council chambers. Ren Uchiha. Homura Mitokado shouted, slamming his cane against the stone railing. You have crossed the line. You have staged a public spectacle, tampered with state prisoners, and forced false confessions under the influence of your visual prowess. Guard Corps, arrest him. Not a single Anbu moved. The masked operatives standing on the roof and in the shadows looked at one another, their postures hesitant. To move against the Uchiha patriarch, who had just publicly freed enslaved leaf shinobi, would instantly brand them as tools of a corrupt dictatorship in the eyes of the entire village. False confessions. Ren laughed, a deep, mocking sound that echoed off the surrounding buildings. You elders are quick to protect one another. But you cannot hide the physical evidence of your sins. Danzo Shimura did not just order the harvesting of my clan's bloodline, he wears his crimes on his very body. Ren raised a single finger, pointing it directly in the direction of the Konoha General Hospital. I accuse Danzo Shimura of desecrating the corpses of the Uchiha clan. I accuse him of physically stealing and grafting the sacred Sharingan onto his own flesh, violating the laws of the shinobi world and committing the ultimate act of treason against a founding clan of the Hidden Leaf. The crowd erupted. Stolen Sharingan. An old civilian shopkeeper yelled. An elder would do that. No way. The Sharingan can only be used by the Uchiha bloodline. A Chunin from the Sarutobi clan shouted back, trying to defend his clan head's ally. This is an Uchiha fabrication to seize power. On the balcony, Hiruzen felt his heart stop. His hand gripped his pipe so tightly the wood groaned under the pressure. He knew. He had always known that Danzo possessed Shisui Uchiha's right eye. If Ren forced a public inspection, the fragile peace-keeping Konoha together would completely shatter. This is an absolute outrage. Kaharu Udatane shrieked, her face twisting in panicked disgust. Danzo is a founding father of this village. He lies bedridden in a hospital room, critically injured while defending the village's secrets from a rogue attack. To accuse a war hero of such a grotesque abomination without a shred of proof is a crime punishable by death. We deny this completely. Homura bellowed, stepping forward to shield Hiruzen. The council officially rejects these baseless accusations. The Uchiha clan is attempting to use the chaos of Itachi's defection to defame the leadership of Konoha. There will be no inspection. This assembly is dismissed. Ren's expression did not change. He had anticipated their denial. In fact, he had counted on it. The more the Konoha Four tried to suppress the truth, the more guilty they appeared to the common populace. You deny it, Ren said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, predatory register. The Konoha Four speak with one mouth, covering up the stench of your own rot. You claim I have no proof. But the people of this village are not blind, nor are they stupid. Ren turned his body slightly, addressing the massive crowd of civilians and lower-ranked shinobi. People of Konoha, look at your leaders. If Danzo Shimura is innocent, if his hands are clean, why do they desperately block a simple medical examination? If there is nothing beneath his bandages but the honorable scars of a shinobi, why do they tremble at the thought of the light? The words spread through the crowd like wildfire. Ren was using the ultimate weapon of the modern era, public opinion. He was shifting the burden of proof from himself to the elders. He's right, a voice shouted from the civilian sector, a plant placed by Ren's secret Uchiha network. If Danzo has nothing to hide, let the medical corps check him. Yeah, show us his face. Let the neutral medic nin check his eyes. Another group roared. Within seconds, the chant took over the entire plaza. Hundreds of voices joined together, a deafening wave of noise pounding against the Hokage building. Check his eyes. Check his eyes. Check his eyes. Hiruzen looked down at the sea of angry faces. He saw the doubt in the eyes of his own regular shinobi forces. He saw the terror in Homura and Kaharu. The political leverage had completely shifted. If he refused the examination now, the village would riot, believing the Hokage was complicit in the theft of Kekkei Genkai bloodlines. Enough. Hiruzen's voice boomed, reinforced by an immense wave of old, heavy chakra that forced the crowd to fall silent. He closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping under a profound weight. He looked at Ren Uchiha. If we proceed with this examination, and Danzo is found innocent of these charges, the Uchiha clan will face absolute martial law for treasonous slander. Do you accept? I accept, Ren said, his eternal Mangekyo gleaming with a terrifying, absolute certainty. Let the chief of the medic nin and a delegation from the neutral clans perform the examination right here, in the open air of the plaza. Let the truth be seen by all. 20 minutes later, the atmosphere in the plaza was suffocatingly tense. A medical gurney had been wheeled out from the hospital, surrounded by a heavy guard of both Uchiha forces and official Hokage Anbu. Lying on the gurney, hooked up to breathing apparatuses and chakra monitoring seals, was Danzo Shimura. His chest was still heavily wrapped in bandages from the crushing blow Ren had dealt him during the time stop, and his entire right arm and right eye were covered in thick, heavily sealed white cloth. Danzo was conscious, but his breathing was shallow. His remaining left eye glared at Ren with a mixture of venomous hatred and genuine terror. He tried to speak, but the tubes in his throat and his shattered lungs reduced his voice to a wet, pathetic wheeze. Chief Medic Tsunade is absent from the village, Hiruzen announced, stepping down into the plaza alongside Homura and Kaharu. Therefore, the head of the Konoha hospital and a representative from the Nara clan will conduct the visual inspection of Danzo's right eye and right arm. The chief medic nin stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly as he approached the bedridden elder. Beside him stood Shikaku Nara, the clan head and chief strategist of the village, his expression deeply troubled. Shikaku looked at Ren, sensing the terrifying trap the young Uchiha had laid, but he had no choice but to proceed. Begin, Hiruzen ordered, his voice hollow. The medic nin formed a soft green diagnostic chakra over his hands. He gently reached down, his fingers catching the edge of the heavy, sealed bandages wrapping around Danzo's right eye. Danzo's left eye widened in sheer panic. He thrashed against the gurney, his chakra spiking erratically, but his broken body could not resist. Ripped, the white cloth was pulled away, exposing the right side of Danzo's face. A collective, horrified gasp echoed across the plaza, followed by a sudden, freezing silence. There, nestled deeply within Danzo's right socket, was not an ordinary eye. It was blood red. It possessed 3 distinct, black tomo that spun wildly in panic before locking onto the crowd. The Sharingan. The chief medic nin stumbled backward, his face losing all color. It's a fully matured 3-tomo Sharingan. It's been surgically grafted into his nervous system. By the sage. Shikaku Nara whispered, his lazy demeanor entirely vanishing as he stared at the stolen eye. The chakra signature. It belongs to Shisui Uchiha. The body that went missing weeks ago. Before anyone could recover from the shock, Ren stepped forward, his voice cutting through the horror like a guillotine. The eye is just the beginning, Ren snarled, his voice vibrating with absolute coldness. Unwrap his right arm. Let the village see what else this ghoul has harvested from our children. The medic nin, now completely horrified, didn't even wait for Hiruzen's permission. He rushed to the right side of the gurney and sliced through the heavy, chakra-suppressing metal locks and seals holding Danzo's right arm bound. He peeled back the thick layers of leather and cloth. What lay beneath was a nightmare born of forbidden science. Danzo's right arm was not human flesh, it was a pale, sickly white prosthetic made of Hashirama Senju cells. But embedded along the entire length of the forearm, like disgusting, blinking boils, were multiple crimson eyes. 3, 5, 10 fully matured Sharingan eyes, embedded into the pale skin, blinking and spinning in frantic, chaotic directions as they were exposed to the morning light. The civilian crowd went completely hysterical. Women shrieked, men vomited into the dirt, and shinobi drew their weapons in absolute, visceral disgust. The elder of their village, the man who preached about the will of fire and the protection of the leaf, was a walking graveyard of their dead comrades. Ren stood over the thrashing, exposed Danzo, his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan burning down into the old man's soul. Behold the protector of Konoha, Ren's voice boomed, carrying across the entire valley, sealing the fate of the Shimura clan forever. A grave robber. A thief. A monster who wears the eyes of our slaughtered brothers and sisters as jewelry. Hiruzen Sarutobi. Homura Mitokado. Kaharu Udatain. You denied it. You protected him. Now, tell the village. Who are the true traitors? Chapter 6, The Verdict of the Public Square. The revelation of Danzo's grotesque arm turned the central plaza into an arena of sheer pandemonium. The air grew heavy with the collective rage of civilian families and shinobi alike. On the gurney, exposed to the glaring sun and the hateful stares of hundreds, Danzo Shimura realized he had lost the political war. His secret army was leaderless, his reputation was in ashes, and his ultimate goals were shattered. A dark, desperate madness consumed his remaining left eye. If I am to fall, Danzo thought, his teeth grinding together through the breathing tubes, I will rewrite this entire plaza. I will make them all forget. With a sudden, violent surge of willpower, Danzo forced his remaining chakra to flood up into his right eye socket. The stolen three-tomo eye of Shisui Uchiha violently distorted, shifting instantly into a 4-point pinwheel pattern, Kotoa Matsukami, the ultimate genjutsu. Danzo intended to cast it upon Hiruzen Sarutobi or the surrounding clan heads, forcing them to order the immediate execution of Ren and the total suppression of the crowd. Die, you Uchiha brat! Danzo wheezed, his right eye flaring with a dangerous, golden-red luminescence, but Ren's Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan was already tracking every micro-expression of Danzo's face. To someone who could manipulate the very flow of time, Danzo's desperate struggle was moving in slow motion. Chrono stop. Snap, the universe slammed into absolute stillness. The furious screams of the crowd were instantly cut off. The birds hovering in the sky became frozen ornaments. The glowing chakra within Shisui's eye locked in place, hovering on the verge of activation like a frozen sparkler. In the quiet, motionless world, Ren calmly walked over to the gurney. His face was a mask of cold, unyielding iron. He didn't waste a single millisecond. Ren reached into his vest, pulling out a set of 5 heavy iron sealing spikes, the abyssal meridian anchors he had obtained through his system's passive storage. With 5 precise, ruthless thrusts, Ren drove the spikes directly into Danzo's core chakra points, his shoulders, his thighs, and his lower abdomen. The spikes instantly deployed a dense network of black, runic sealing ink that spread across Danzo's skin, completely locking his chakra pathway system down to absolute zero. Next, Ren drew a specialized surgical scalpel. With fluid, practiced motions backed by his flawless ocular precision, he sliced through the grafted optical nerves of Danzo's right eye. He plucked Shisui's Mangekyo Sharingan from the socket, placing it safely into a preservation scroll. Without pausing, he turned to the pale, white arm of Hashirama cells. With a clean, sweeping slice of a chakra-infused blade, Ren severed the entire prosthetic arm from Danzo's shoulder joint. The arm, still embedded with the 10 stolen Sharingan eyes, was stuffed into a heavy storage scroll and sealed away. Ren stepped back into his original position and snapped his fingers. Time resumed. Spurt. A fountain of dark, stagnant blood erupted from Danzo's severed shoulder socket. Danzo let out a choked, muffled scream of agony, his body violently convulsing against the gurney. The golden glow of Kotoa Matsukami vanished entirely, replaced by an empty, bleeding hole in his face. His chakra vanished, suppressed so thoroughly by the iron spikes that he couldn't even summon the strength to hold his head up. To the crowd, it looked as if Danzo had simply exploded with blood and lost his limbs in a literal fraction of a second. The traitor tried to activate Shisui Uchiha's ultimate genjutsu to brainwash the village leadership. Ren's voice boomed across the plaza, his hand holding up the blood-stained scalpel. But under the eyes of the Uchiha, his pathetic tricks are nothing but a joke. The stolen eyes of my kin have been recovered. Danzo. Hiruzen Sarutobi screamed, finally leaping down from the balcony, his face twisted in horror and grief as he saw his oldest friend reduced to a bleeding, limbless torso. He rushed to the side of the gurney, his hands glowing with a desperate surge of medical chakra to stabilize Danzo's failing vitals. Homura and Kaharu landed right behind the Hokage, their expressions a mix of profound terror and defensive fury. They looked at the empty eye socket and the missing arm, and then up at Ren, who stood over them like an ancient god of judgment. Ren Uchiha. Homura bellowed, his voice shaking with absolute rage. You have crossed the line of sanity. You have mutilated an elder of the Hidden Leaf in broad daylight. This is a declaration of war against the administration. A declaration of war, Ren countered, his voice dripping with icy amusement. No, Elder Homura. This is the execution of justice. This creature is no longer an elder. He is a traitor to the Leaf, a grave robber who violated the very treaty that founded this village. Ren turned back to the roaring crowd, raising his hand to channel their fury. People of Konoha. For the crime of high treason, for the systematic slaughter of Leaf shinobi to harvest their flesh, and for attempting to use a forbidden genjutsu on the village public, I demand the ultimate sentence. Public execution by beheading, right here, right now. Execute him. Execute the monster. The crowd roared back, their voices a deafening tsunami of righteous anger. The civilian population, horrified by the image of the eye-embedded arm, wanted blood. The minor shinobi clans, realizing their own bloodlines could be harvested next by the elders, demanded a public cleansing of the administration. No, we deny this. Kaharu stepped forward, her hands shaking as she pointed her cane at Ren. The council officially denies this demand. As the executive elders of the Hidden Leaf, we reject the call for a public execution. Danzo Shimura is a political figure of the highest order. He cannot be tried or executed by a single clan. Kaharu is right, Homura shouted, backing her up frantically. Any trial regarding a member of the council must be conducted behind closed doors, under the strict supervision of the Hokage and the Clan Elders Alliance. The Uchiha clan has no legal authority to execute a village official in the public square. This is a violation of the Leaf's constitution. Ren looked at the two panicked elders, his Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan spinning with a dark, mocking amusement. They were desperate. They knew that if Danzo was executed publicly today, the remaining 3 of the Konoha 4 would be next on the chopping block. They were clinging to their outdated laws and political bureaucracy to shield a monster. You deny the will of the people? Ren asked, his voice dropping into a quiet, dangerous whisper that carried across the plaza. You look at these stolen eyes, you look at these confessions, and your first thought is to protect him behind closed doors. To sweep his atrocities under the rug of your administrative offices. Ren, stop this, Hiruzen Sarutobi said, standing up from Danzo's side, his breathing heavy. His old, wrinkled face looked hollow under the sunlight. Danzo's crimes are severe. He will be stripped of his title. He will be locked away in the deepest cells of the Konoha penitentiary for the rest of his days. But a public execution without a formal trial will destroy the stability of the village. I, as the third Hokage, deny your request. The Konoha 4 had unified their front. Despite the overwhelming evidence, despite the fury of the public, they were using their absolute executive veto to shield Danzo from immediate death. Ren stared at Hiruzen for a long, silent moment. The crowd watched in bated breath, wondering if the young Uchiha patriarch would start an open, bloody war right there in the square. Instead, Ren's Mangekyo slowly faded back into the calm, deceptively peaceful black of his ordinary eyes. He let out a soft, chilling laugh. Very well, Lord Third, Ren said, bowing his head in a gesture that was entirely devoid of actual respect. If the Konoha 4 wish to protect their own, the Uchiha clan will respect the bureaucracy of the village. Take him. Lock him in your deepest cell. Homura and Kaharu let out a collective sigh of relief, their shoulders visibly relaxing. They believed they had won the legal battle, that they had successfully contained the Uchiha's rage through the weight of the Hokage's office. They had no idea that they had just signed their own death warrants. Ren looked at the bleeding, unconscious form of Danzo being wheeled away by panicked Anbu guards. By forcing the elders to publicly deny the execution, Ren had completely alienated the Konoha 4 from the rest of the village. The trust between the people and the Hokage was permanently broken. To the public, Hiruzen was no longer a benevolent leader, he was a corrupt politician protecting a grave robber. You want him in a cell, Hiruzen. Ren thought, a dark, demonic smile twisting his mind. Perfect. A cell is a very isolated place. A place where time can stop. And where no one will ever hear him scream. Chapter 7, The Blood Debt of the Sarutobi. The shadows in the underbelly of Konoha were long and malleable, deep within an isolated surveillance outpost near the perimeter of the village. A lone Hokage Anbu operative stood guard. His code name was Taka. He was a loyal soldier of Hiruzen Sarutobi, trained to give his life for the administration. Snap, the universe stopped. The flickering oil lamp on the wall froze into a static, jagged crystal of yellow light. Ren materialized directly in front of the frozen Anbu operative. His Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan spun in a slow, mesmerizing pattern, the interlocking blades of blood-red light reflecting deep within the soldier's motionless pupils. Ren did not draw a blade. He simply placed a single hand over Taka's forehead, channeling a dense, dark ocean of visual chakra directly into the man's neural pathways. When time resumes, Ren whispered, his voice echoing inside the frozen chambers of Taka's mind, you will feel an ancient, unyielding hatred for the Sarutobi bloodline. You will see them as the parasites who stole your family's future. You will march into their estate, and you will rewrite their legacy in bone and screams. Ren stepped back into the shadows and snapped his fingers. Time snapped back into motion. Taka blinked, his eyes instantly flushing with a dull, vacant red glow under his porcelain mask. The brainwashing was absolute, carved into his soul by the boundless power of the Eternal Mangekyo. Without a single word, the possessed Anbu drew his serrated chakra blade and slipped into the night, moving toward the Sarutobi clan compound like a phantom. An hour later, the quiet night of the inner ring of Konoha was shattered by a piercing, agonizing scream. Inside the private courtyard of the Sarutobi clan head's estate, the air tasted of copper. Asuma Sarutobi, the Hokage's youngest son, was away on a border patrol, but the inner manor was occupied by Hiruzen's eldest son, his wife, and their young children, including the Hokage's toddler grandson, Konohamaru. By the time the regular compound guards broke through the heavy oak doors of the main pavilion, they were met with a scene from a living nightmare. Taka, the possessed Anbu, stood in the center of the tatami room, drenched from head to toe in fresh, steaming blood. He wasn't killing his targets. Ren's instructions had been hyper-specific, designed for maximum psychological torture. Lying on the floorboards, weeping and convulsing in pools of dark crimson, were Hiruzen's son and daughter-in-law. Their hands and feet had been brutally, systematically severed from their limbs, the cuts jagged and deliberate, ruined beyond the capabilities of ordinary medical ninjutsu. In the corner of the room, the young Konohamaru lay unconscious, his small hands and feet similarly mangled and broken, pinned to the floor with heavy iron spikes. Die. Parasites. Taka muttered, his voice a distorted, robotic drone as he raised his blood-soaked blade to continue the mutilation. Stop right there. The compound guards roared, throwing themselves forward. It took 5 elite Sarutobi Junin to finally tackle the possessed man to the ground, slamming his face into the bloody tatami boards as they stripped away his weapons. As they ripped off his porcelain mask, the guards gasped in horror. It wasn't an enemy ninja. It was one of their own, a trusted captain of the Hokage's personal guard corps. Chapter 8: The Weight of the Law. The central square of Konoha was cold under the pale light of the dawn. The news of the horrific attack on the Hokage's immediate family had spread like wildfire through the upper echelons of the village. The political tension, already boiling from Danzo's exposure the previous day, had reached a catastrophic breaking point. Hiruzen Sarutobi stood in the center of the execution courtyard, his standard Hokage robes replaced by his dark, ancient battle armor. His face was no longer that of a calm, grandfatherly leader, it was a terrifying mask of primal, unadulterated grief and murderous rage. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling violently as he gripped the heavy iron staff, Enma, which hummed with dense, destructive chakra, bound in heavy, chakra-suppressing chains. In the center of the courtyard was Taka, the Anbu operative. The brainwashing had worn off, leaving the man confused, terrified, and weeping as he looked at his own blood-stained hands. Why? Hiruzen's voice boomed, a deep guttural roar that caused the stone walls of the courtyard to crack. The sheer pressure of his old age chakra forced the surrounding guards to drop to their knees. I trusted you. My family protected you. Why did you do this to my children? I don't know, Lord Third. Taka sobbed, thrashing against the chains. I remember a shadow. And then a voice. A voice that told me I had an unyielding vendetta against your bloodline. I couldn't stop my hands. Please, kill me. Just kill me. You monstrous parasite. Homura Mitokado shouted from the sidelines, his face twisted in defensive panic. He has confessed. He has brought ruin to the Hokage's lineage. Hiruzen, execute him now. Take his head. Hiruzen raised his heavy iron staff, the wind chakra around the weapon screaming as he prepared to bring it down and turn Taka's skull into a fine red mist. For the crime of destroying my blood. You will burn in purgatory. Chronos, stop. Snap, the universe slammed into absolute stillness. Hiruzen's staff locked inches away from Taka's face, the violent currents of wind chakra frozen into solid, static ripples. The tears flying from Taka's eyes hung in the air like glass beads. Ren Uchiha walked calmly out from the shadows of the arched doorway. His black mantle fluttered slightly as he strolled past the frozen guards, his Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan burning with a cold, triumphant brilliance. He stopped right between the Hokage and the prisoner, resting his hand lightly against the side of Hiruzen's frozen iron staff. He smiled, a dark, demonic expression of absolute victory. He snapped his fingers, time resumed, clang. A sharp, ringing vibration echoed through the courtyard as Ren's hand deflected the trajectory of the staff, forcing the heavy weapon to slam harmlessly into the stone tiles, shattering the floorboards into a web of deep craters. Ren Uchiha. Hiruzen gasped, stepping back, his breath catching in his throat as he stared at the young patriarch who had materialized out of nowhere. Out of my way. This man tried to erase my family. He must die. Die, Ren asked, his voice dripping with an icy, mocking echo that carried across the entire courtyard, perfectly mimicking the exact tone Hiruzen had used the previous day. No, Lord Hokage. We cannot simply execute him. Homura stepped forward, his fists clenched. What nonsense are you speaking, brat? He mutilated the Hokage's grandson. He cut the hands and feet of our kin. This is an absolute capital offense. Ren turned his gaze to Homura, and then back to the hollow, grieving face of Hiruzen Sarutobi. He let out a soft, chilling laugh that sent shivers down the spines of the surrounding guards. Have you forgotten your own laws so quickly, elders? Ren asked, his voice rising so the entire gathering could hear him. Yesterday, in the public square, I brought you a monster. I brought you Danzo Shimura, who systematically slaughtered the children of my clan, dug out their eyes, and grafted them onto his own flesh. The entire village demanded his head. The Uchiha clan demanded a public execution. Ren took a slow step closer to Hiruzen, his blood-red eyes narrowing into a terrifying slit. But what did you say to me, Lord Third? You stood before the people and you said, a public execution without a formal trial will destroy the stability of the village. You used your executive veto to protect your oldest friend from immediate death. Hiruzen's eyes widened as the realization of Ren's trap slammed into his mind like a physical blow. His face turned completely pale, his lips trembling. So today, I am simply returning your own wisdom to you, Ren continued ruthlessly, his voice ringing with a devastating ironies. For this crime, this man cannot be executed. As the executive leaders of the Hidden Leaf, we must respect the bureaucracy of our system. He can only be stripped of his title. He will be locked away in the deepest cells of the Konoha penitentiary for the rest of his days. You did this. Kaharu Udatane whispered from the stairs, her hands shaking so violently she dropped her cane. You planned this attack to throw our words back in our faces. I have no idea what you are talking about, Elder Kaharu, Ren lied smoothly, his expression a mask of perfect, mocking innocence. The Uchiha clan was tucked safely in our compound all night. This man is an Anbu under your direct command. He claimed he had a vendetta against the Sarutobi. Perhaps your administration should look into its own shadow before accusing the victims. Ren turned his back in the Hokage, his black mantle swirling in the cold morning wind. If you break your own law today to execute this man out of personal grief, Lord Third, you will prove to the entire village that the laws of Konoha only apply when the Uchiha bleed, Ren said, his voice echoing with absolute, final authority. Lock him away in the cell right next to Danzo. Let them keep each other company in the dark. The Uchiha clan will be watching to ensure the stability of the village is maintained. Without waiting for a response, Ren walked out of the execution courtyard, leaving the three remaining elders of the Konoha Four standing in the ruins of their own system, utterly shattered, powerless, and choking on the taste of their own medicine. Chapter 9, The Echo of the Gavel. The news did not trickle through the Hidden Leaf village, it burst like a broken dam. By noon, every tea house, merchant stall, and training ground was buzzing with the horrific details of the night attack inside the Sarutobi compound. The details were too precise, too gruesome to be kept secret. The Hokage's eldest son, his daughter-in-law, and even his young grandson, Konohamaru, had been brutally mutilated. Their hands and feet were severed, their futures as shinobi permanently erased, but as the initial shock subsided, a strange, suffocating atmosphere settled over the civilian and shinobi population of Konoha. It wasn't just grief that the people felt. It was a profound, biting sense of irony. Inside a crowded izakaya near the village center, a group of off-duty chunins sat around a low wooden table, their expressions grim as they nursed their drinks. Did you hear what happened at the execution grounds this morning? One of them whispered, leaning in closely. The Hokage was ready to crush that rogue ANBU's skull with his iron staff. He was out of his mind with rage. And? A younger ninja asked, his eyes wide. Ren Uchiha stopped him, the first Chunin replied, a dark, complicated smile playing at the edge of his lips. Right in front of the council elders. Ren looked the Hokage dead in the eye and repeated the exact words Hiruzen used yesterday to protect Danzo. He told the Hokage that the man couldn't be executed. That he had to be stripped of his title and locked in the deepest cell of the penitentiary to maintain the stability of the village. A heavy, telling silence descended upon the table. That's incredibly twisted, the young ninja murmured. But it's exactly what the Hokage demanded for Danzo. Exactly, an older Jonin sitting at the bar chimed in, turning around to face them. His face bore the scars of the Third Shinobi World War. Yesterday, Danzo was exposed as a literal monster. He stole the eyes of dead Uchiha children, grafted them onto his arm like trophies, and tried to brainwash the village public. The Uchiha demanded his head, and the entire village backed them up. But what did the Hokage do? He hid behind his laws. He protected his old friend from the executioner's blade. The Jonin took a slow sip of his sake, his eyes flashing with a cold light. Now, 24 hours later, the Hokage's own blood is spilled by one of his own brainwashed Anbu operatives. And the Uchiha patriarch forces him to eat his own words. If Hiruzen Sarutobi executes that Anbu now, he proves to every single one of us that the laws of this village are a joke. They only apply when the Uchiha bleed, but the moment the Hokage's family suffers, the rules change. It's karma, a civilian merchant at a neighboring table muttered aloud, no longer fearing the ears of the secret police. The elders allowed Danzo to harvest our people for decades. They turned a blind eye to the darkness because it suited them. Now, that very darkness has walked right into the Hokage's bedroom and taken his grandson's hands. They reaped exactly what they sowed. Similar conversations were repeating in every corner of the village. The public opinion, which the Konoha 4 had spent decades carefully manipulating through the philosophy of the will of fire, was completely fracturing. The hypocrisy of the leadership had been laid bare in the most brutal, undeniably ironic fashion. To the common people, Ren Uchiha was no longer just a powerful young shinobi, he was the living embodiment of divine retribution. He hadn't raised a hand against the Hokage's family, yet his absolute adherence to the Hokage's own judicial ruling made him look entirely righteous, while making Hiruzen look weak, compromised, and trapped by his own corruption. Up on the Hokage monument, Ren stood atop the stone-carved head of the first Hokage, Hashirama Senju. The wind howled across the peak, whipping his heavy black mantle around his ankles. His Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan was active, the blade encircled crimson patterns spinning slowly as he peered down at the bustling, fractured village below. Ding! The crystalline chime of the Overlord System echoed sharply within his mind. System announcement, public sentiments shift locked. Mission progress, the prestige of the Hokage office has dropped by 45%. The civilian population and minor clans now view the Konoha 4 as hypocritical dictators. Internal trust within the Anbu Corps has degraded by 30%. Overlord rating, S rank. A deep, dark satisfaction rippled through Ren's chest. A crown built on lies will always collapse under the weight of its own rules. By using Taka as a puppet, Ren had completely avoided any chakra tracking or physical evidence connecting the Uchiha to the crime. Even if the Yamanaka clan attempted to dig into Taka's mind, they would find nothing but an absolute, unyielding wall of system-reinforced visual hypnosis. To the world, it was an internal Anbu malfunction, a rogue soldier driven mad by a personal vendetta against the Sarutobi, but the true victory was the political paralysis of the Hokage. Hiruzen was currently trapped in a living hell. His family was ruined, yet he was legally and publicly forbidden from taking the life of the perpetrator without destroying his own remaining legitimacy as a leader. Patriarch, a quiet voice echoed from the shadows behind the stone carving. Yashiro Uchiha, one of the senior military commanders of the clan who had been resurrected by Ren's time card, materialized out of a flicker of body flicker smoke. He dropped to one knee, his posture radiating a level of absolute, fanatical devotion that the Uchiha had never shown even to Fugaku. Speak, Ren commanded, not turning his head. The Konoha General Hospital is under absolute lockdown by the Hokage's personal guard, Yashiro reported, his voice tight with anticipation. Danzo Shimura has been moved from the regular ward. Under the joint orders of Homura and Kaharu, he is being transferred to the underground containment facility beneath the central penitentiary tonight. They are using a decoy transport route to avoid public riots. Ren's lips curled into a predatory, elegant smile. His right eye flashed with a brilliant, golden-red hue. A decoy transport, Ren murmured, his voice laced with icy amusement. They still think they can play chess with me. They think if they hide him deep enough in the dirt, I won't be able to reach him. He turned his body slightly, looking down at Yashira. The dense, suffocating pressure of his Eternal Mangekyo chakra caused the loose pebbles on the stone head to vibrate and shatter into dust. Let them move him, Yashira. Let them place him in the deepest, darkest cell they have. Let them surround him with their barrier seals and their elite guards. The more security they waste on a dying, limbless dog, the more vulnerable the rest of their clans become. And what of the Hokage? Yashira asked, his eyes gleaming with a thirst for vengeance. The Sarutobi clan is currently weak, mourning their losses. Should we mobilize our forces to pressure the borders of their compounds? No, Ren said, waving his hand dismissively. An old lion whose cubs have been mangled is at his most dangerous. If we push Hiruzen too hard right now, he will abandon his political mask and start an open war of desperation. We do not need to fight him. The venom of public irony is already killing his legacy from the inside out. Ren raised his left hand, his fingers curling slowly into a tight, crushing fist. We will let the village continue to whisper. We will let the minor clans grow more resentful of the elders' hypocrisy. And tonight, when the moon reaches its peak and Danzo is locked safely inside his unbreakable tomb, I will walk into his cell, and I will finally collect the debt he owes to the Uchiha bloodline. Space around Ren's body began to warp, twisting into a violent, silent vortex that pulled his form inward like water draining from a basin. Within a fraction of a second, he vanished into thin air, leaving Yashira alone on the mountain peak. The stage was set for the final hour of Danzo Shimura. The walls of the central penitentiary, designed to keep the most dangerous criminals trapped inside, were about to become a tomb that no one could escape. Chapter 10: The Extinction of the Mitokado. The night was a thick, ink-black velvet blanket that stifled the screams of the world, while the Hidden Leaf Village was entirely hyper-focused on the heavy security details guarding the central penitentiary and the grieving Sarutobi estate. The eastern sector of Konoha remained dangerously quiet. This was the ancestral territory of the Mitokado clan, the bloodline of Elder Homura Mitokado. Unlike the Uchiha or the Hyuga, the Mitokado were not a legendary shinobi clan born with a Kekkei Genkai. They were a lineage of high-ranking administrators, logistical masterminds, and elite tacticians who had amassed immense wealth, land, and political power by feeding off the shadow economy of the village for 3 generations. At the center of the compound sat the Grand Mitokado Manor, a sprawling estate built of premium timber, guarded by a private detachment of 30 elite jonin loyal only to Homura, inside the main pavilion. The lights were burning bright. Homura's eldest son, Kenji Mitokado, paced the length of a polished cedar hallway, his face twisted in anxiety. He was a high-ranking official in the Leaf's logistics department, but the political disasters of the past 48 hours had left him deeply shaken. "We need to mobilize the private reserves," Kenji muttered to the clan elders surrounding him in the war room. If the Uchiha push for a total audit of the administration following Danzo's exposure, the missing war funds from the Land of Rivers will be traced straight back to our vaults. The Hokage is too broken by his family's tragedy to protect us right now. "Calm down, Kenji," an older Mitokado elder sighed, pouring a cup of hot tea. "The Uchiha are powerful, but they are bounded by public eye. Ren Uchiha is playing a legal game. He won't dare move against an entire founding clan without a legal decree from the Hokage office." Snap! The universe slammed into an absolute, suffocating halt, the steam rising from the hot teacup froze in midair, locking into a solid, twisted pillar of white vapor. The flickering shadows cast by the candles stiffened against the paper shoji screens. The frantic pacing of Kenji stopped mid-stride, his foot suspended an inch above the wooden floorboards. From the very center of the room, space distorted. A violent, silent vortex spun into existence, and Ren Uchiha stepped out into the frozen world. His Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan burned with a terrifying, crimson luminescence in the dead dark. The interlocking blade patterns spun in vicious, predatory rotations. He looked around the frozen war room at the 5 senior leaders of the Mitokado clan. "You think I am playing a legal game?" Ren whispered, his voice a chilling echo that existed only within the vacuum of stop time. "You think because I forced Hiruzen to swallow his own laws, I am bound by them myself? How pathetic." Ren didn't have much time, only 5 seconds per activation, but with his newly evolved Eternal Mangekyo, the chakra cost was cut in half, and the strain on his eyes was entirely gone. He could chain his abilities with absolute impunity. Ren formed a single hand sign with his left hand. Snake, he didn't use fire or lightning. To ensure that no elemental chakra signature could ever be traced back to the Uchiha, he utilized a localized application of his space distortion power. He walked calmly around the table. With precise, elegant touches of his fingertips, he tapped the chests of all 5 frozen Mitokado elders, including Kenji. At each contact point, Ren injected a microscopic seed of unstable space-time chakra directly into their hearts. He stepped back into the spatial vortex, his left eye spinning violently as he pulled his own body back into the dimensional void. Tick. The 5 seconds ended. Time snapped back into motion. PFFT. 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 There were no explosions. There was no smoke. In a single millisecond, the hearts of all 5 Mitokado leaders simply collapsed inward, violently crushed into microscopic singularities by the spatial seeds Ren had planted. They didn't even have the time to gasp. Their eyes rolled back into their heads, and all 5 men collapsed simultaneously onto the tatami mats, dead before their bodies even hit the floor. Outside the war room, the 30 elite private guards patrolling the courtyard grounds suddenly felt the ambient temperature of the night drop to a freezing chill. Before the lead guard could raise his hand to signal a perimeter alert, the world froze again. Snap! Ren materialized in the center of the courtyard, standing beneath a massive cherry blossom tree. His blood-red eyes scanned the 30 frozen shinobi scattered across the roofs and stone paths. 30 guards, Ren murmured, looking up at the sky. Too noisy to kill one by one. He pulled up the digital blue interface of his Overlord System, accessing his inventory. Item inventory, 1x, Abyssal Silent Desolation Mist System Reward. Description: deploys a localized, colorless, and odorless toxin that instantly paralyzes the nervous system and vaporizes cellular structures upon contact with chakra-heavy organisms. Leaves absolutely no chemical or elemental trace behind. Deploy, Ren commanded coldly. A wave of completely invisible, silent energy erupted from his body, expanding outward across the entire Mitokado compound in a fraction of a second. The mist washed over the 30 frozen guards, seeping through their armor, their skin, and directly into their chakra networks. Ren snapped his fingers, ending the time stop. Whoosh! As time resumed, the 30 elite Jonin didn't even get a chance to realize they were under attack. The moment their hearts beat once, the cellular structure of their bodies completely disintegrated. Their physical forms turned into a fine, gray ash that was instantly swept away by the cold night wind, leaving behind nothing but empty flak jackets, swords, and sandals cluttering the stone pathways. Ren walked calmly through the empty, silent courtyard, stepping into the residential pavilions of the Mitokado clan. He was entirely ruthless. The system mission was absolute, the annihilation of the Konoha 4. To leave a single child, a single wife, or a single distant cousin alive would mean leaving a seed of future hatred that could complicate his total control over the Hidden Leaf village. This was a war of extinction. The elders had attempted to wipe out the Uchiha. Now, the Uchiha would erase them from the pages of history. For the next 20 minutes, the Mitokado compound became a silent slaughterhouse. Utilizing a constant, seamless combination of Chrono's stop and his spatial intangibility, Ren systematically moved from room to room, building to building. Every single member of the Mitokado bloodline, 142 souls, was executed in their sleep or mid-sentence. Their hearts were collapsed, their throats collapsed, or their cells vaporized by the system's desolation mist. Not a single drop of blood stained the walls. Not a single alarm seal was triggered. The massive barrier surrounding the compound remained completely stable, showing the outside world that everything was perfectly normal. By the time the moon reached its zenith, Ren stood back at the main entrance gates of the Mitokado estate. Behind him, the entire compound was a ghost town. 142 corpses lay perfectly preserved in their beds or rooms, their lives snuffed out so cleanly that a forensic medic nin would find absolutely nothing but a sudden, spontaneous cessation of cellular life. The private army of the clan was reduced to piles of empty clothes and scattered ashes. Ren pulled up his system interface. Mission update: the annihilation of the Konoha 4. Target 2, the Mitokado clan, Elder Homura's bloodline, 100% wiped off. Current status: 1/4 elders clans completely annihilated, Shimura clan is isolated, Mitokado clan is extinct. Partial reward triggered, 50% integration of high-tier wood style, Mokuden, bloodline template. An incredible, vibrant surge of life energy suddenly erupted within Ren's lower abdomen. It wasn't the violent, burning agony of the Eternal Mangekyo evolution, it was a deep, soothing wave of natural vitality that flowed through his veins like liquid jade. His physical stamina doubled, his natural healing factor skyrocketed, and his chakra reserves expanded to a level that rivaled a tailed beast. He could feel the latent connection to the earth beneath his feet, the trees in the distance whispering to his newly awakened Senju-derived DNA. Ren looked back at the dark, silent manor of the Mitokado. A cold, demonic smile graced his lips as he deactivated his eyes, letting them return to standard black. Tomorrow morning, Elder Homura Mitokado would walk out of his administrative office, tired from a long night of political maneuvering, and he would return home to find his entire lineage turned into cold, lifeless dolls. He would scream, he would rage, but he would find absolutely no evidence, no chakra tracks, and no witnesses. The second elder is broken, Ren whispered into the cold night wind, his body beginning to spiral inward into his Kamui vortex. 2 more to go. Let's see how long your will of fire can burn when there is no wood left to feed the flames. Hiruzen. With a soft rustle of leaves, the courtyard fell into a dead, terrifying silence, leaving behind the empty shell of a clan that had ceased to exist. Chapter 11, The Ledger of the Damned. The morning sun rose over Konoha, but it brought no warmth. Instead, it illuminated an absolute nightmare for the administration. When the shopkeepers opened their doors and the genin gathered at the training grounds, they found thousands of identical, bound books left anonymously on every doorstep, bench, and rooftop in the village. The book was titled simply, The Chronicles of the Shadow, The True Cost of the Leaf. By noon, the entire infrastructure of the Hidden Leaf village had ground to an absolute halt. No one was training. No one was buying goods. Civilians and low-ranking shinobi sat on the curbs, crowded into alleyways, and stood in the middle of the streets, their eyes glued to the pages of the anonymous text. The contents were not mere rumors, they were filled with precise dates, classified mission codes, financial ledgers, and matching signatures that could only come from the highest levels of the Council's private archives, unlocked and compiled flawlessly by Ren's Overlord System. Inside the crowded central marketplace, an elite jonin from the Aburame clan stood reading a copy aloud to a massive gathering of silent, horrified villagers. Chapter 2, The Betrayal of the Whirlpool. The Aburame read, his voice flat but carrying a chilling weight. In the 37th year of the Leaf, the Uzumaki clan of Uzushio, the closest blood allies of the Senju, were besieged by the combined forces of Kumo, Kiri, and Iwa. According to Council Document 409B, signed by Hiruzen Sarutobi and Danzo Shimura, the Leaf military forces were explicitly ordered to delay their reinforcement march by 4 days. The rationale: to allow the total destruction of the Uzumaki bloodline, ensuring that the Uzumaki's legendary sealing techniques and sealing artifacts would be left unprotected, allowing Root to harvest them from the ruins. A collective gasp of pure horror rippled through the civilian crowd. They let our closest allies die. A civilian woman whispered, burying her face in her hands. The Uzumaki wore our crest on our flak jackets. We swore an oath to them. It gets worse, the Aburame Jonin continued, turning the page, his bugs buzzing erratically around his shoulders, sensing his internal fury. Chapter 3, The Ghost of the Senju. Following the death of the first and second Hokage, the Senju clan did not simply fade away through marriage. Between the Second and Third Shinobi World Wars, over 300 pure-blooded Senju youth were assigned to high-mortality suicide missions under the direct order of elders Homura Mitokado and Kaharu Yuditane. Their bodies were never recovered. Instead, they were routed to the underground laboratories of Root, where their DNA was harvested to fuel forbidden biological experiments for the Council. The plaza went dead silent. The sacred founders of the village, the very bloodline that built the walls they lived inside, had been systematically culled and experimented upon by the very men who claimed to inherit the will of fire. Read about the White Fang. A Chunin shouted from the back, his fists clenched until his knuckles turned white. Read what they did to Lord Sakumo. The Aburame flipped the pages to a section bordered in stark black ink. Chapter 5, The Engineered Suicide of Sakumo Hitaki. The White Fang did not fail his mission due to incompetence. The leaked information regarding his choice to abandon the mission to save his comrades was intentionally distributed to the civilian population by the administrative propaganda network operated by Kaharu Yuditane. The smear campaign was designed to break Sakumo's spirit and force his suicide, because his immense popularity among the shinobi forces threatened Hiruzen Sarutobi's re-election as the third Hokage after the war. Monsters. A young genin wept, dropping his kunai into the dirt. Lord Sakumo was a hero. They drove him to slit his own belly just to keep their seats. The book did not stop at historic betrayals. The final chapters laid bare the absolute financial corruption of the Konoha 4. It listed the exact coordinates of private gold vaults, weapon hoarding facilities, and vast estates owned by the Sarutobi, Shimura, Mitokado, and Yuditane clans, while the common civilian struggled to buy bread during the post-war recession, and while the families of dead shinobi received a measly pittance from the village pension fund, the Konoha 4 had accumulated riches that could fund an entire nation. The ledger showed that Homura Mitokado's clan alone held over 40 billion ryo in hidden accounts, wealth drained directly from the mission taxes of the minor clans. The collective consciousness of Konoha fractured completely. The illusion of the benevolent, loving Hokage was dead. The will of fire was exposed as a hollow, bloody marketing slogan used to trick young ninja into dying for the bank accounts of 4 corrupt old rulers. Up on the roof of the administrative building, Hiruzen Sarutobi stood holding a copy of the book. His hands shook so violently the paper rattled. Beside him, Kaharu Yuditane was hyperventilating, her face completely pale as she leaned against the stone wall for support. Where did this information come from? Kaharu shrieked, her voice cracking with absolute terror. These are documents from our private vaults. Only the 4 of us had access to these files. Even the Anbu didn't know about the Senju culls. It doesn't matter where it came from, Hiruzen whispered, his voice sounding incredibly ancient, hollowed out by a despair far deeper than the mutilation of his family. He looked down at the streets. He could see the hatred in the eyes of the villagers looking up at his office. It's over, Kaharu. The trust is gone. We cannot suppress this. If we use force now, the entire village will turn their weapons inward. What about Homura? Kaharu gasped. He hasn't arrived at the office today. We need his administrative forces to lock down the printing presses. Before Hiruzen could answer, an Anbu operative materialized on the roof, crashing to his knees in a panic so severe he forgot basic military protocol. Lord Hokage. Disaster. The Anbu screamed, his voice cracking beneath his mask. The Mitokado compound. It's a graveyard. We went to find Elder Homura, but the entire clan. Every single man, woman, and child is dead. 142 corpses. Kaharu let out a strangled cry, collapsing entirely onto the stone floor. Homura. His clan. Wiped out. Are there any signs of a struggle? Hiruzen roared, grabbing the Anbu by his vest, his eyes wide with a manic terror. Who did it? Was it the Uchiha? No, Lord Third. The Anbu wept. There is no blood. There are no entry wounds, no chakra signatures, no residual jutsu tracks. The forensic medic nin say their hearts simply stopped beating at the exact same millisecond last night. The courtyard is full of empty clothes turned to ash. It's as if the heavens themselves cursed their bloodline. Hiruzen let go of the operative, stumbling backward until his back hit the railing. He looked across the village, his gaze automatically drifting toward the pristine, quiet, and completely orderly Uchiha compound. He knew. In his heart, he knew it was Ren Uchiha, the public exposure, the destruction of his own family, the political paralysis, and now the total, bloodless extinction of the Mitokado clan. It was a flawless, terrifyingly synchronized symphony of destruction. Ren wasn't just killing them, he was dismantling their legacies, stripping away their honor, and turning their own village against them before delivering the final blow. Meanwhile, inside the Uchiha compound, the atmosphere was serene. Children were playing in the streets, and the clan members were going about their daily lives with an air of quiet pride. They, too, had read the book. They now realized that their previous suspicions of Konoha's leadership were only a fraction of the truth. Their new patriarch hadn't just saved them from a massacre, he had unmasked the true demons of the leaf. Ren sat in the center of his private garden, calmly pouring a cup of green tea. His Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan was hidden behind his calm black eyes, but his perception was sharper than ever. With his newly integrated wood-style life energy, he could feel the frantic, chaotic vibrations of the village's anxiety through the very roots of the trees surrounding him. Ding. System announcement, public anarchy triggered. Mission progress, the credibility of the Konoha 4 has dropped to 0%. The civilian population is on the verge of open revolt. Elder Homura's clan has been confirmed extinct. Overlord rating, SSS rank. Final integration unlocked, 100% high-tier wood style, Mokuden, bloodline template fully fused with the host's Uchiha genetics. Ren took a slow, elegant sip of his tea, a cold, majestic smile gracing his features. The balance of power was no longer shifting, it had already tilted entirely into his hands. The Konoha 4 were no longer leaders, they were ghosts waiting for the executioner's blade, trapped inside a prison of their own making while the entire village watched them rot. 2 elders remain, Ren whispered to the wind, his eyes briefly flashing into the blade-encircled crimson galaxy of his eternal eyes. Let's see how much longer you can hold your breath, Hiruzen. Chapter 12, The Ash of the Will of Fire. The Hidden Leaf Village had always been a city built on a sermon. For 3 generations, every academy student, every grieving orphan, and every crippled shinobi had been told the same sacred story: where tree leaves dance, one shall find flames. The shadow of the fire will shine on the village, and once again, tree leaves shall bud new life. It was the will of fire. A philosophy of self-sacrifice, unity, and love that supposedly treated every single villager as a cherished member of the Hokage's own family. But on this afternoon, as the thousands of pages of the Ledger of the Damned sat open under the scorching sun, the sermon died. The words that had once inspired tears of devotion now tasted like ash in the mouths of the populace. Inside the compound of the Inuzuka clan, a fierce military family known for their loyalty and their battle hounds, a massive gathering of Jonin and Chunin stood around their clan matriarch, Sum Inuzuka. On the wooden table in front of her lay the anonymous book, open to the financial accounting pages of the Sarutobi and Mitokado estates. Look at these numbers, Sum snarled, her canine teeth bared in a snarl of pure disgust as her wolf dog companion growled beside her. During the Second Shinobi World War, my clan lost 42 active fighters. My brother died holding the line against the Stone Village so the main forces could retreat. The council gave his widow 50,000 ryo and a plastic medal. They told us it was the will of fire to sacrifice for the collective. She slammed her fist down on the ledger, splintering the polished wood. But look here. That same year, the Sarutobi clan acquired 3,000 acres of prime agricultural land in the Land of Fire, paid for by administrative defense bonuses signed by the Hokage himself. Homura Mitokado bought a private mansion in the capital with funds marked as battlefield logistics management. The will of fire didn't burn for the village. It burned my family to ashes so the Konoha 4 could cook their private feasts. A chorus of angry barks and furious shouts erupted from the Inuzuka ninja. The illusion was completely shattered. They finally realized the horrific mathematics of the leaf. The minor clans provided the blood and the corpses, while the Konoha 4 provided the vaults to hold the stolen riches. Across the village, in the bustling commercial sectors, the change was even more dramatic. Whenever an administrative official or an Anbu operative loyal to the Hokage walked past, the civilians didn't bow or show respect anymore. They scoffed. They spat on the dirt. Outside a popular dango shop, 3 retired chunin, men who had lost limbs in service to the village, sat watching a squad of Hokage Anbu sprint across the rooftops, desperately trying to tear down the remaining copies of the book. Look at them run, one of the old ninja laughed, his voice raspy and dripping with raw, unfiltered mockery. They're moving so fast. I wonder if they're acting on the will of fire, right now. Oh, absolutely, his companion mocked, raising his teacup in a theatrical, sarcastic toast toward the Hokage monument. Remember what the 3rd Hokage told us at the memorial service last year. The village is my family, and I love you all as my children. He loved us so much that when Danzo dug out the eyes of those Uchiha kids, the Hokage hid him in a hospital to make sure he didn't catch a cold. The surrounding civilians burst into a wave of loud, derisive laughter. The phrase will of fire had transformed overnight from a sacred oath into the ultimate punchline. It was a synonym for corruption, a code word for an elder stealing from a soldier. Hey, did you hear the Hokage's son and grandson had their hands and feet cut off? A merchant whispered, lean in with a vicious smile. The Hokage wanted to execute the Anbu who did it on the spot. But the Uchiha patriarch told him no. He told him we have to respect the stability of the village. We have to lock him in a cell just like Danzo. It's a beautiful thing, the old ninja cackled, shaking his head. The Hokage spent 40 years telling us to sacrifice our children for the peace of the village. Now his own grandson is a cripple, and he has to sit in his office and watch the rules he made protect the man who did it. I guess the fire finally spread to his own backyard. The mockery was a weapon far more dangerous than any ninjutsu. A physical rebellion could be crushed with blades and shadow clones, but a village that was laughing at its leader could not be controlled. The moral authority of Hiruzen Sarutobi was dead. He was no longer the wise, benevolent god of shinobi, he was a pathetic, exposed hypocrite being openly ridiculed by the very people he had spent his life manipulating. Up on the roof of the Uchiha clan head's manor, Ren stood silently, his arms crossed over his chest beneath his black mantle. He didn't need his Sharingan to hear the waves of mocking laughter and angry murmurs rising from the streets below. The collective consciousness of the village was rewriting itself exactly according to his design. With his newly acquired high-tier wood-style bloodline fully integrated, Ren could feel the raw vitality of nature pulsing through his body. He raised his hand, and with a simple thought, a tiny, vibrant green sprout broke through the hard stone tiles of the roof, twisting upward before blooming into a beautiful, blood-red flower. Hashirama Senju used this power to build a haven of peace, Ren murmured, staring at the flower before crushing it between his fingers, the red petals turning to moisture. But he was naive. He believed that love and a shared sermon could unite human beings. He didn't realize that a system built on unearned trust will always breed parasites like the Konoha 4. The Uchiha did not believe in sermons. They believed in strength, in absolute clarity, and in the unyielding reality of the eyes. By exposing the true history of the leaf, Ren hadn't just weakened the Hokage, he had prepared the soil for a new order. When the people finally tore down the old throne out of sheer disgust, they would look for a leader who didn't lie to them with pretty words about fire. They would look for an overlord who could guarantee their survival through absolute, terrifying power. Patriarch, a cold voice echoed from the courtyard below. It was Makoto Uchiha, or rather, the hollow puppet that Ren had allowed to survive the massacre night by resetting the timeline. She stood looking up at him, her expression serious but her eyes radiating a deep, newfound respect for the young man who had completely flipped the fate of their clan in a matter of days. The Hyuga clan head, Hiyoshinara, and the heads of the Akamichi and Yamanaka clans have just sent formal, confidential missives to our estate, Makoto reported, her voice low. They are requesting an emergency, closed-door summit with you tonight at midnight. They want to discuss the future of the Hokage office. Ren's lips curled into a slow, majestic smile. His eyes instantly flushed into the intricate, blade-encircled crimson galaxy of his Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. The minor clans were jumping ship. They realized that staying loyal to the sinking wreckage of the Konoha 4 would mean their own destruction. They were coming to him to beg for a place in the new world. Tell them I will receive them, Ren commanded, his voice carrying a heavy, dense pressure that caused the air around the rooftop to ripple. But remind them of one thing, Makoto. They are not coming to negotiate a treaty. They are coming to swear an oath of fealty to the Uchiha. The era of the council is over. The era of the Overlord has begun. Chapter 13, The Awakening of the Legends. The pages of the Ledger of the Damned did not merely fracture the political landscape of the Hidden Leaf, they ripples across the elemental nations, tearing through the illusions of the world's most formidable shinobi. The truth, backed by flawless copies of original administrative signatures and encrypted cipher keys, spared no one. Deep within the dense forests of the Land of Fire, Jiraiya of the Sannin sat on a moss-covered boulder, a half-empty bottle of sake resting at his feet. In his hands, the anonymously distributed text rattled against his trembling fingers. The legendary Toad Sage, a man who had spent decades wandering the world in search of a prophecy of peace, looked suddenly hollow, his wrinkled face losing all color. The Uzumaki. Jiraiya whispered, his voice cracking with a raw, agonizing grief. My student, Minato. His wife's entire bloodline was left to rot because Hiruzen wanted their sealing scrolls. 4 days. We were ordered to stay back for 4 days to secure the border logistical routes. He slammed his fist into the stone beneath him, shattering the boulder into a web of deep craters. Tears of pure, unadulterated shame leaked from his eyes. He had spent his entire life praising the will of fire, trusting his master, Hiruzen Sarutobi, blindly. He had believed that the tragedies of the world were the inevitable casualties of war. You lied to me, sensei, Jiraiya choked out, staring at the copy of Hiruzen's personal seal on the delay order. You turned the will of fire into a slaughterhouse, and you made me its cheerleader. Hundreds of miles away, inside a subterranean laboratory lit by the eerie green glow of biochemical vats, Orochimaru ran a pale, long-nailed finger across the page detailing the culling of the Senju clan. A soft, chilling hiss of laughter escaped his lips, though his snake-like eyes remained entirely cold. Kukuku. How truly magnificent, Orochimaru murmured, his tongue flicking out to taste the damp air. The righteous old man, Hiruzen, banished me from the village for conducting human experimentation. He wept tears of moral outrage as he chased me across the border. He closed the book with a sharp snap, leaning back against a glass cylinder containing a failed clone. And all the while, my beloved teacher was running a larger, far more efficient butcher shop right beneath the training grounds, slicing up the children of Hashirama Senju to fuel Danzo's private army. The hypocrisy of the righteous is a truly beautiful poison. It almost makes me feel nostalgic. In the land of rivers, Tsunade of the Sannin sat inside a dimly lit gambling den, surrounded by piles of discarded betting tickets. Her apprentice, Shizune, stood beside her, weeping silently. Tsunade didn't cry. Her eyes were wide, fixed on Chapter 3, the ghost of the Senju. The names of her distant cousins, her childhood friends, and her family members were listed in a neat, clinical column, all assigned to high-mortality suicide missions by Homura and Kaharu, their bodies rerouted to Root. My family built that village, Tsunade whispered, her voice dangerously quiet. The immense, dense chakra within her body flared, causing the wooden sake cups on the table to crack and shatter simultaneously. Grandfather gave his life. Nawaki died. Dan died. All for a village that was secretly hunting our blood like animals. She stood up, her fists clenched so tightly her fingernails drew blood from her palms. The heavy, protective seals on her forehead pulsed with a violent green light. Shizune, Tsunade commanded, her tone dropping into a freezing, lethal register. Pack the bags. We are going back to Konoha. Not to save it, but to watch it burn. Inside the Hidden Leaf Village, atop a high wooden post overlooking the training grounds, Kakashi Hatake sat completely motionless. His copy of the Ledger of the Damned lay open on his lap, turned to the section titled, The Engineered Suicide of Sakumo Hatake. His Mangekyo Sharingan spun weakly behind his pulled-down forehead protector, staring blankly at the text detailing how Kaharu Uchiha had personally orchestrated the public smear campaign against his father. The mission failure had been a manufactured trap. The public scorn that drove the White Fang to slit his own stomach had been a controlled political play to secure Hiruzen's re-election. I hated him, Kakashi whispered to the empty wind, his voice devoid of any human warmth. I spent my entire childhood treating my father like a traitor because I thought he broke the sacred rules of the village. I forced myself to become a perfect tool. All to honor a system that put a knife in his hand. He reached up, slowly pulling his forehead protector completely off, exposing his scarred left eye to the sun. The silver-haired Jonin looked up at the Hokage monument, his gaze fixing on the stone face of the third Hokage. There was no sadness left in Kakashi's heart, only a cold, bottomless abyss of absolute disillusionment, but the most devastating awakening occurred within an abandoned mountain temple, where Itachi Uchiha sat staring at the ledger with bloodshot eyes. The anonymous book had reached the Akatsuki network within 24 hours. Itachi had spent the last 6 hours reading every single line, every document code, and every financial transaction of the Konoha 4. Beside him, Obito Uchiha stood silently, his single Sharingan tracking the young prodigy's deteriorating mental state. As long as Sasuke survives, my sin has meaning. That had been Itachi's mantra. He had butchered his aunts, his uncles, his friends, and his parents, believing he was choosing the greater good. He had believed Hiruzen Sarutobi's gentle words about protecting the fragile peace of the world. He had convinced himself that the Uchiha clan's pride was a selfish disease that threatened the innocent children of the leaf, but the ledger proved, with undeniable mathematical certainty, that the conflict had been entirely engineered. The Uchiha had been pushed to the edge, their funds drained, their patrols sabotaged, and their reputation destroyed by Danzo and the council to justify a harvest of their eyes. I was naive, Itachi whispered, his voice trembling as a massive, uncontrollable wave of spiritual agony erupted behind his eyes. He closed his eyes, but he couldn't block out the image of his father accepting the blade, proud of his kind child. He couldn't block out the image of his mother whispering her final blessing, they had died for a lie. He had turned himself into a kinslayer, an international criminal, and a monster to protect a council of grave robbers who had been harvesting Senju and Uzumaki children for decades. His sacrifice wasn't a tragic necessity, it was a pathetic, easily manipulated farce. He had been a perfect, obedient dog, fetching the eyes of his own family and handing them to Danzo on a silver platter, and Sasuke. His precious little brother, whom he had left behind to be the Avenger, had been executed by Ren because Itachi's own foolish actions had branded the boy a traitor. They used me, Itachi choked out, blood pouring freely from both of his eyes, staining his Akatsuki cloak in deep, dark streaks. The will of fire. It was nothing but a shroud to hide the graves. I told you, Itachi, Obito said from the shadows, his voice carrying a dark, satisfied rumble. The system of this world is entirely broken. Your peace was a delusion. Itachi stood up slowly, the crimson aura of his Susanoo flaring to life around his body, violently shattering the stone pillars of the temple. The sheer intensity of his grief and rage threatened to tear his own mind apart. He didn't care about Konoha anymore. He didn't care about the peace of the world. The grand, noble philosophy he had built his entire identity upon had been exposed as a cheap, dirty trick. Ren was right. Itachi hissed, his teeth grinding together until they cracked, his Mangekyo Sharingan spinning with a manic, murderous frequency. The Uchiha didn't need a diplomat. They needed an executioner. I am going back, Madara. I will slide my blade through Hiruzen's throat myself. I will tear down the elders' offices until nothing but ash remains. The stage is already set, Obito replied, his single eye gleaming through his mask. The village is completely paralyzed. The legends are returning, and the people are screaming for blood. The throne of the leaf is completely empty. And Ren Uchiha is waiting to take it. Chapter 14, The Reaping of the Sarutobi. The rain that had threatened the Hidden Leaf village for days finally broke, falling in a dense, freezing downpour that washed over the rooftops and turned the streets into slick, dark mirrors. Inside the primary compound of the Sarutobi clan, the atmosphere was suffocating. Following the horrific mutilation of his immediate family and the devastating exposure of the Ledger of the Damned, Hiruzen Sarutobi had withdrawn completely to the Hokage administrative tower, attempting to salvage the remnants of his crumbling government. The ancestral compound was left under the protection of 70 elite Sarutobi clan Jonin and the remaining household guards. In the center of the dark courtyard, a single pool of water rippled, from the center of the distortion, space twisted inward like a violent whirlpool. Two figures stepped out into the pouring rain. One wore an orange, swirling mask that gleamed under the flashes of distant lightning, Tobi. Beside him stood a young man with long, dark hair tied loosely behind his back, his black Akatsuki cloak completely soaked by the storm. Itachi Uchiha. His eyes were active, but they were no longer the calm, calculative three-tomo or the orderly pinwheel of his standard Mangekyo. They were bloodshot, blood pouring freely from both sockets, mixing with the rain tracking down his pale, hollow cheeks. The legendary calmness of Itachi had been entirely replaced by a hollow, bottomless abyss of pure, unadulterated despair. He had slaughtered his own parents for a lie. He had allowed his brother to die for a farce. The barrier seals have been completely bypassed by my Kamui, Tobi whispered, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that was easily swallowed by the sound of the thunder. The guards are unaware. Execute them cleanly, Itachi. Let the Hokage feel the exact weight of the despair you carried. Itachi did not answer. He took a single step forward, his hands forming a single hand sign. Tiger. Who goes there? A loud voice roared from the watchtower. A Sarutobi Jonin had spotted the two cloaked figures through the dark rain. Intruders. Raise the Amaterasu. Before the guard could finish his sentence, Itachi's left eye focused. A violent torrent of pitch black, unquenchable flames erupted directly onto the watchtower. The stone, the wood, and the screaming shinobi were instantly consumed by the black fire, burning with a demonic intensity that the freezing rain could not even slow down. The alarm was raised, but it didn't matter. The stage was no longer a battlefield, it was a slaughterhouse. Enemy attack. Defend the main pavilion. The Sarutobi commander bellowed, leading a squad of 20 elite fighters into the courtyard, their hands forming rapid signs to unleash their signature fire-style jutsuts, but before their chakra could manifest, the air behind them warped. Tobi materialized out of the spatial void directly in the center of their formation. With terrifying, silent speed, he swung a massive, heavy iron chain connected to his wrists. Using his phasing ability, he passed through their defensive blades, wrapping the chains around the throats of 4 Jonin simultaneously and pulling them violently into his Kamui dimension, crushing their bodies within the void. Fire style, great fireball technique. Itachi's voice echoed, cold and devoid of any human warmth. A massive sea of roaring, crimson fire erupted from his mouth, expanding until it filled the entire courtyard. The heat was so immense it instantly vaporized the falling rain, turning the courtyard into a blinding, scalding field of white steam. The Sarutobi Jonin attempted to counter with earth-style walls, but the sheer volume and density of Itachi's chakra cracked the stone structures like glass. Spurt. 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 Through the thick steam, Itachi moved like a ghost. He didn't use advanced genjutsu to trick them, he didn't care about lessons or tests anymore. He drove his sleek chakra blade through the hearts and throats of his former comrades with a terrifying, mechanical efficiency. Every strike was fueled by the agony of a son who had realized his sacrifice was a joke. Why? A bleeding Sarutobi elder choked out, clutching his severed abdomen as he stared up at Itachi's bloodshot Mangekyo. We were your allies. The Hokage loved you like a son. He loved the Uchiha's submission, Itachi whispered, his voice cracking with a terrifying, quiet madness. He loved the eyes I brought him. He loved the lie. With a clean, sweeping slice, Itachi ended the elder's life. The massacre inside the Sarutobi compound continued for 40 minutes. While Tobi held the perimeter, phasing through every counterattack and dragging the fleeing reinforcements into the dark void, Itachi systematically cleaned out every pavilion. He didn't spare a single active fighter. The very bloodline that had orchestrated the systematic culling of the Senju, the abandonment of the Uzumaki, and the framing of Sasuke was being systematically reaped by the very weapon they had spent years sharpening. By the time the storm began to clear, the grand estate of the Sarutobi clan was a smoking, black-charred ruin. 68 elite Jonin and the entirety of the clan's core leadership lay out in the dirt, their bodies either consumed by the unquenchable black flames of Amaterasu or cut down by Itachi's blade. Only the crippled household members, those who could no longer wield a weapon, were left alive to tell the tale. Itachi stood in the center of the ruined hall, his breathing heavy, his chest heaving violently as he vomited a thick stream of dark blood. The excessive use of his Mangekyo without the eternal template was rapidly burning out his optical nerves, but he didn't care. The physical pain was a mercy compared to the rotting guilt inside his soul. The Hokage's personal guard is approaching from the administrative sector, Tobi said, appearing beside him as the spatial vortex opened once more. Our work here is done, Itachi. Let the old man return to find his nest empty. Itachi slowly closed his bleeding eyes, his body trembling as he let the spatial vortex wrap around his cloak. Let him burn in the fire he built. With a final, violent swirl of space-time energy, both Tobi and Itachi vanished from the hidden leaf village, leaving behind nothing but the crackle of black flames and the silent, smoking corpses of the Sarutobi lineage. An hour later, the central plaza outside the ruined compound was blocked off by hundreds of panicked, pale-faced Anbu operatives. Hiruzen Sarutobi stood in the center of his ancestral courtyard, his Hokage hat dropping from his limp hand into the bloody mud. He looked at the charred bones of his cousins, the ash of his clan's archives, and the absolute destruction of his family's legacy. He didn't scream. He didn't roar. He simply dropped to his knees, his old, wrinkled hands clutching his face as he let out a dry, pathetic sob that was completely devoid of the majesty of the god of shinobi. Itachi. Hiruzen whispered into the dirt, his voice trembling with an ultimate, crushing despair. Why? Why did you do this? From the top of the surrounding perimeter wall, a single figure sat watching the old man's misery. Ren Uchiha sat cross-legged on the stone ledge, his heavy black mantle draped elegantly over his shoulders. His Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan was active, the blade encircled crimson patterns spinning slowly as he watched the final collapse of the third Hokage's spirit. He hadn't needed to lift a finger to destroy the Sarutobi clan. By distributing the ledger of the damned, he had simply handed Itachi the mirror to see his own naivety. The weapon that Hiruzen had spent decades creating had turned around and taken the old man's entire world away. Ding! The sharp crystalline chime of the Overlord System echoed within Ren's mind, pulsing with an ominous, triumphant light. System announcement, core fate destruction achieved. Mission progress, the Shimura clan is isolated. The Mitokado clan is extinct. The Sarutobi clan has been 90% eliminated by their own weapon. Only one elder clan remains. Overlord Prestige, SSS rank. The village population has completely abandoned the concept of the will of fire. Ren stood up slowly, the wind catching his hair as he looked away from the weeping Hokage. The time for subtle psychological warfare was over. The foundations of the old leaf were completely shattered, and the legends were returning to see the ruins. It was time to build the new throne. Chapter 15, The Final Eclipse. The rain had stopped, leaving the hidden leaf village draped in a heavy, humid fog. The air smelled of wet stone, burnt timber, and raw fear. Following the sudden, brutal annihilation of the Sarutobi compound by the rogue hands of Itachi and Tobi, a state of emergency had been declared. The streets were completely barren, patrolled only by silent squads of tense, heavily armed Anbu, but no amount of military security could protect an empire whose foundations were built on rot deep within the heavily fortified inner sanctuary of the Uchiha clan estate. Elder Kaharu Uchiha sat at her mahogany desk. Her hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, trembled violently as she attempted to organize a stack of emergency evacuation scrolls. She wasn't thinking about the village anymore. She wasn't thinking about the will of fire. She was thinking about survival. Homura is dead. Danzo is a crippled torso in a hole. Hiruzen's family is butchered, and his military lineage is wiped out, Kaharu thought, her breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps. It's him. It's that demon, Ren Uchiha. He isn't just killing us. He is erasing our very names from the history books. She reached into her drawer, pulling out a specialized, direct line summoning scroll meant to contact the border outposts. She needed to flee to the capital of the land of fire under the cover of darkness. Snap! The universe slammed to a sudden, absolute, and suffocating halt. The flickering flame of the oil lamp on her desk froze into a solid, jagged crystal of orange light. A drop of sweat that had been sliding down Kaharu's pale cheek locked in place, suspended against her skin. The wind howling outside her window died instantly, the swirling fog in the courtyard freezing into motionless ghost-like waves. From the dark corner of the room, the space began to ripple. A silent, violent vortex spun into existence, and Ren Uchiha stepped out into the frozen world, his Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan burned with a brilliant, terrifying crimson hue in the dead quiet. The intricate, blade-encircled rings spun in slow, majestic rotations. He was clad in his high-collared black patriarch mantle, looking down at the frozen old woman with an expression of pure, unyielding indifference. You're packing your bags, Kaharu, Ren whispered, his voice a chilling echo that existed only within the vacuum of stop time. A bit late for a vacation, don't you think? Ren didn't waste a single millisecond of his 5-second limit. Thanks to his system-optimized Eternal Eyes, his chakra reserves were massive and completely unburdened by strain. He formed a single hand sign with his left hand, snake, with his newly integrated high-tier wood-style bloodline pulsing through his veins. Ren didn't need to use traditional weapons. He extended his right hand, his fingers transforming into thin, razor-sharp wooden tendrils made of compressed, high-density senju cells. With absolute, surgical precision, Ren drove the wooden tendrils straight through the back of Kaharu's skull, piercing her brain stem, and out through her chest, bypassing her heart just enough to ensure she wouldn't die instantly when time resumed. He wanted her to feel the end. He snapped his fingers. Time resumed. Spurt. A choked, wet gasp escaped Kaharu's lips as blood erupted from her mouth, splashing across the pristine white papers of her evacuation scrolls. The sudden, agonizing pain exploded through her nervous system, but the wooden tendrils locked inside her spine prevented her from screaming or moving a single muscle. She stared down at the wooden spikes protruding from her chest, her eyes wide with a manic, primal terror. She slowly turned her head, her vision rapidly blurring as she looked at Ren. You monster. Kaharu wheezed, blood bubbling past her teeth. The village will never follow you. The village is already mine, Kaharu, Ren said, his voice entirely calm, dripping with a terrifying majesty. They don't follow me because they love me. They follow me because they have finally realized that the men and women they worshipped for 40 years were nothing but grave robbers, liars, and thieves. I didn't destroy Konoha. You did. I am just cleaning up the trash. Ren subtly channeled his wood-style chakra. Instantly, the wooden tendrils inside her body began to expand, branching out like tiny tree roots through her veins. The wood rapidly absorbed her remaining chakra and life force, desiccating her body from the inside out within seconds. Kaharu's eyes went completely dull, the light draining from them as her skin turned a sickly, dried gray. She collapsed forward onto her desk, a hollow, lifeless husk. Ren pulled his hand back, the wooden tendrils receding into his skin without leaving a single drop of blood on his fingers. He looked at the corpse, his expression completely blank. The Konoha 4 were officially broken. Danzo was a political ghost, Homura's clan was extinct, the Sarutobi were slaughtered, and Kaharu was dead. The old regime that had orchestrated the systematic suffering of the Uchiha, the Senju, and the Uzumaki had been completely dismantled in less than a week. The sunrise of the new order. Next morning, the Hidden Leaf village awoke to a world that felt completely alien. The news of Elder Kaharu Udatane's sudden, natural passing, in her sleep had spread, but no one believed the official report. The villagers didn't care anymore. The revelation of the Ledger of the Damned had turned the entire populace into an angry, chaotic sea of distrust. Groups of civilian merchants and low-ranking shinobi stood outside the Hokage administrative building, openly shouting, demanding the immediate resignation of Hiruzen Sarutobi, but the true center of gravity had shifted entirely to the eastern sector of the village. Inside the Grand Assembly Hall of the Uchiha Patriarch's estate, the atmosphere was dense with a crushing, suffocating political pressure. The massive sliding doors were closed, sealed by high-tier barrier arrays to ensure absolute privacy. Sitting cross-legged on the elevated tatami dais at the front of the hall was Ren Uchiha. He sat with perfect posture, his hands resting lightly on his knees, his heavy black mantle draped elegantly around him. His face was calm, his ordinary black eyes staring down at the men gathered before him, kneeling on the lower floorboards, their heads bowed low in a posture of complete, undeniable submission, were the heads of the village's most prominent minor clans, Hiashi Hyuga, the proud leader of the Gentle Fist bloodline. Shikaku Nara, the chief strategist of the village. Choza Akamichi and Inoichi Yamanaka. Beside them sat Su Minazuka and the representatives of the Aburame and Karama clans. These were the families that formed the actual backbone of Konoha's military might. And today, they were not here to negotiate a treaty. They were here to survive. Patriarch Ren, Hiashi Hyuga spoke first, his voice tight, his eyes fixed firmly on the wooden floorboards. The traditional pride of the Hyuga clan was entirely absent, replaced by a cold, calculating realism. The exposure of the council's actions has left the village without legal leadership. The Hyuga clan cannot, and will not, support a Hokage who allowed the systematic culling of our founding bloodlines. We have come to offer our full cooperation to the Uchiha. Shikaku Nara raised his head slightly, his sharp, analytical eyes scanning Ren's calm demeanor. The administrative infrastructure of the Leaf is paralyzed, Ren. The Sarutobi clan cannot field fighters, and the Mitokado and Udatane assets are frozen. If this continues, the neighboring nations will invade within the month. We need a central authority. A single, absolute pillar of strength to stabilize the state. Ren looked down at the clan heads, a soft, slow smile spreading across his lips. It was a beautiful sight, the most powerful men in the village coming to his doorstep to beg for an master. A single pillar, Ren repeated, his voice carrying a deep, resonant weight that seemed to echo off the walls. You speak of stabilization, Commander Nara. But what you truly mean is that you want the Uchiha clan's protection. You saw what happened to the Mitokado. You saw what happened to the Sarutobi. And you are terrified that if you do not bow your heads today, your clans will be the next to vanish into the dark. The room went completely silent. Su Minazuka swallowed hard, her hand tightening over her companion dog's fur, but she didn't dare speak out. They all knew Ren was speaking the absolute truth. Ren stood up slowly, stepping off the dais. As he moved, his black eyes instantly flushed blood red, spinning furiously into the intricate, blade-encircled crimson galaxy of his Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. The sheer density of his spiritual energy erupted into the hall like a physical wave, forcing several of the weaker clan representatives to gasp for air under the crushing pressure. Let us be entirely clear, Ren announced, his voice rising with an undeniable, absolute authority. The era of the Konoha 4 is dead. The era where a council of weak, greedy politicians could manipulate the blood of noble clans from behind a desk is over. I am not interested in forming a new council. I am not interested in sharing a throne with your departments. Ren stopped right in front of Hiashi Hyuga, his crimson eyes burning down into the pale, vacant eyes of the Hyuga leader. If you wish to walk out of this hall alive, and if you wish for your lineages to prosper in the new world I am building, you will not offer me cooperation. You will offer me your absolute, unconditional fealty. From this day forward, the Uchiha clan is the sole, supreme ruler of the Hidden Leaf. My word is the law. My shadow is your protection. Hiashi Hyuga did not hesitate. He placed his palms flat against the tatami mat and pressed his forehead directly against the wood. The Hyuga clan swears absolute fealty to the Uchiha Patriarch. One by one, driven by the absolute terror of Ren's eyes and the brilliant realization that the old world was gone, the remaining clan heads bowed their heads into the dirt. Shikaku Nara, Choza, Inoichi, Sume, the entire military elite of the Hidden Leaf village collapsed into a sea of submission at his feet. Ren stood in the center of the bowing masters, his long black mantle catching a sudden draft of wind from the opening screens. A cold, majestic smile graced his features as he looked toward the direction of the Hokage Tower. The old lion, Hiruzen, was now completely alone inside his empty castle, abandoned by his students, hated by his people, and stripped of his army. The stage was finally cleared for the final act. Chapter 16, The Broken Blade. The Hokage's private office had always been a sanctuary of quiet authority, smelling of dried ink, old tobacco, and the faint, sweet scent of tea. For over 40 years, Hiruzen Sarutobi had sat behind his massive mahogany desk, issuing commands that shaped the fate of the shinobi world. Tonight, the room felt like a tomb. The storm outside had cleared, leaving behind a cold, biting wind that rattled the glass window panes. Hiruzen sat motionless, staring blankly at his cold pipe. He looked withered. His cheeks were hollow, his signature white robes stained with the dried soot and ash of his clan's destroyed compound. He had no family left to return to, no council to consult, and an army that no longer answered his call. He was a king without a kingdom, waiting for the final curtain to fall. Creak, the heavy wooden door to the office slid open slowly. Hiruzen didn't look up, expecting another frantic report from an Anbu messenger about a civilian riot or a clan defection. Leave the scroll on the table. Tell the barrier teams to reinforce the eastern perimeter. The barrier teams have already abandoned their posts, Lord Third. The voice was low, flat, and entirely devoid of human warmth. Hiruzen's head snapped up. Standing in the doorway, drenched from the residual rain, was Kakashi Hatake. The silver-haired Jonin wasn't wearing his standard flak jacket or his porcelain Anbu mask. He wore a simple, dark mission outfit, his hands buried deep inside his pockets, but what made Hiruzen's chest tighten was Kakashi's face. His forehead protector was completely pulled up, exposing his scarred left eye. The red iris of his three-tomo Sharingan spun slowly in the dim light of the office, staring at the Hokage with an icy, bottomless detachment. Kakashi. Hiruzen breathed, his voice trembling slightly as he forced a weak, grandfatherly smile onto his wrinkled face. I am glad you are here. The village is facing an unprecedented crisis. I need my most trusted shinobi by my side to stabilize the Anbu core. Your most trusted shinobi? Kakashi asked, taking a slow, deliberate step into the room. The wooden floorboards groaned beneath his sandals. He reached into his pocket and tossed a heavy, leather-bound book onto the desk. It landed with a loud, echoing thud right in front of Hiruzen. It was the Ledger of the Damned. I spent the last 12 hours reading Chapter 5, Lord Third, Kakashi said, his voice dropping into a freezing register. I read the encrypted cipher keys. I checked the administrative logs from the propaganda department. I even verified the signature on the authorization form for the civil smear campaign. Hiruzen's heart plummeted into his stomach. He stared down at the book, his hands trembling so violently he had to hide them beneath the mahogany desk. Kakashi, you must understand. That book is a collection of malicious fabrications designed by the Uchiha to destabilize our leadership. It is an enemy genjutsu on a massive scale. Stop lying to me. Kakashi roared. The sudden, explosive spike of Kakashi's chakra was so intense that the glass windows behind the Hokage's desk cracked, a sharp spiderweb of fractures spreading across the panes. The silver-haired ninja took another step forward, his hands clenching into tight, white-knuckled fists. I am an elite tracking specialist, Hiruzen. I have spent my entire life dissecting enemy ciphers and verifying military documentation. Those records are real. The signatures belong to Kaharu Udatane, and the authorization seal belongs to you. Kakashi stepped right up to the edge of the desk, leaning forward until his blood-red Sharingan was inches away from the Hokage's pale face. My father. Sakumo Hatake. Did he break the rules of the village? Kakashi's voice cracked, a rare, agonizing wave of raw emotion tearing through his usual stoic mask. For 20 years, I hated him. For 20 years, I forced myself to walk past his empty bedroom, telling myself that a shinobi who abandons the mission for his comrades is trash. I lived like a machine because I believed your sermon about the sacred laws of the leaf. Tears of pure, unadulterated bitterness began to track down Kakashi's face, catching the dim candlelight. But it was all a lie, wasn't it? The mission failure didn't destroy the village's reputation. The public scorn that drove him to drive a blade into his own stomach wasn't a spontaneous reaction from the civilians. You engineered it. Kaharu leaked his location, Danzo spun the narrative, and you allowed it to happen because his popularity after the war threatened your re-election as Hokage. Hiruzen closed his eyes, unable to look into the burning red gaze of the boy he had raised after Sakumo's death. The weight of his 40 years of necessary darkness seemed to crush his spine, making it impossible to hold his head high. Sakumo was a magnificent shinobi, Hiruzen whispered, his voice hollow, choosing his words with a pathetic desperation. But his power, his influence over the military forces was growing too large. Kakashi. The council believed. Danzo believed that if a single man's philosophy could override the military directives of the state, the very structure of the Hidden Leaf would collapse into anarchy. It was a political necessity to preserve the system. The system. Kakashi let out a sharp, hysterical laugh that sounded like tearing metal. You call a system that hunts its own heroes to protect a few old chairs justice. You call a philosophy that drives a loyal soldier to suicide, the will of fire. Kakashi slowly reached to his hip, drawing his sleek, white light chakra saber, the broken blade of his father that he had carried as a reminder of his shame. The weapon hummed with a sharp, vibrant blue lightning chakra, illuminating the dark corners of the room. My father died believing he was a failure to his home, Kakashi hissed, his voice dropping into a lethal, unyielding quiet. He died in the dark, weeping because he thought his son would grow up carrying the brand of a traitor's lineage. You didn't just allow him to die, Hiruzen. You stole his honor. You stole my childhood. You turned me into a weapon to defend the very ghouls who put the knife in his belly. Hiruzen stared at the humming blade, a deep, profound resignation washing over his soul. He didn't reach for his iron staff. He didn't form any hand signs. He realized that the ultimate tragedy of his life wasn't that his enemies were strong, it was that his own sins had turned every single one of his children into his executioners. Are you going to kill me, Kakashi? Hiruzen asked quietly, opening his dull, old eyes. If my death can wash away the guilt you carry, then strike. I have no family left to mourn me. Kakashi held the humming blade steady for a long, agonizing moment. The lightning chakra crackled against the mahogany desk, scorching the polished wood. His Sharingan spun furiously, tracing the absolute pathetic weakness of the old man sitting before him, then, with a sudden, violent motion, Kakashi deactivated the chakra. He slammed the white lightsaber down, driving the steel blade directly through the center of the Ledger of the Damned, pinning the book to the mahogany desk with a loud thwack. No, Kakashi whispered, stepping back into the shadows of the doorway. Killing you now would be a mercy. I want you to live, Hiruzen. The Hokage gasped, looking up in confusion. I want you to sit in this empty room, Kakashi said, his voice dripping with an absolute, terrifying cruelty. I want you to listen to the villagers laughing at your sermons outside. I want you to watch the Uchiha take your throne, piece by piece, while your old allies turn their backs on you. I want you to taste every single second of the isolation you forced my father to endure before he died. Kakashi turned his back in the Hokage, his silver hair catching the pale moonlight breaking through the clouds. From this day forward, I am no longer a shinobi of your leaf, Kakashi's voice echoed with absolute finality as he stepped out into the hallway. The Hitaki lineage owes nothing to the ashes. The heavy wooden doors slid shut, leaving Hiruzen Sarutobi completely alone in the dark. He looked down at his desk, where his oldest friend's ledger was pinned by the blade of the boy he had betrayed. The silence of the office was deafening, a suffocating preview of the eternal dark that was waiting to claim him. Chapter 17, The Weight of the Hat. The rain-soaked corridors of the Hokage Tower were completely empty. The standard Anbu guards who usually stood like motionless statues every 10 paces had vanished, having abandoned their posts to join their respective clans or protect their own compounds. The great stone fortress that had once directed the military might of the entire Land of Fire was now nothing more than a hollow, echoing shell. Inside the quiet office, Hiruzen Sarutobi still sat at his desk, staring blankly at the silver blade Kakashi had driven through the Ledger of the Damned. The wood around the puncture wound was black and scorched from the residual lightning chakra. Thud. 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 The heavy, unhurried footsteps of a massive man echoed from the outer hallway. The sliding doors didn't click open gently, they were slammed aside with a violent force that caused the dust to shake from the ceiling. Jiraiya of the Sannin stepped into the room. The legendary Toad Sage was completely drenched from the storm, his massive white hair hanging in heavy, tangled locks over his shoulders. His face was not that of the traveling author or the eccentric wanderer, it was a terrifying, jagged mask of pure, unadulterated grimness. The usual red paint lines beneath his eyes looked like dried, ancient streaks of blood under the dim candlelight. In his massive right hand, he clutched his own copy of the anonymous ledger. Hiruzen slowly raised his dull, bloodshot eyes to look at his student. A faint, desperate glimmer of hope flickered in his chest. Jiraiya, you've returned. Thank the heavens. The village. The Uchiha have orchestrated an internal coup. They have paralyzed our administration. Shut your mouth, sensei, Jiraiya interrupted, his voice a low, guttural growl that sounded like a tectonic plate shifting deep beneath the earth. The raw, dense pressure of Jiraiya's chakra instantly filled the room, forcing the air out of Hiruzen's lungs. The flickering candles on the desk exploded, leaving the room illuminated only by the pale, cold moonlight breaking through the shattered window panes. Jiraiya took a step forward, slamming his copy of the ledger directly onto the desk next to Kakashi's blade. I didn't come back to save your council, Hiruzen, Jiraiya hissed, completely dropping the title of Hokage. I came back from the borders because I read this. I read how you and Danzo explicitly ordered our vanguard to stall for 4 days while the Uzumaki clan was butchered in the ruins of Uzushio. I read how you signed the documents to let Minato's wife's entire bloodline be wiped off the map just so you could pillage their sealing scrolls. Hiruzen flinched, pulling his hands back as if the ledger were a scorching iron. Jiraiya. The geopolitics of that era. You were a field commander, you didn't see the macro strategy. If Konoha had fully mobilized to defend Uzushio, the Stone and Cloud villages would have launched a pincer attack on our unfortified eastern border. It was a choice between a foreign ally and the survival of our own people. Don't you dare use the survival of our people to cover up your greed. Jiraiya roared, his voice shaking the heavy concrete walls of the tower. Minato gave his life for your system. He sealed the 9 tails inside his own son because he believed in the will of fire. He believed that you would protect his legacy. And instead, you let his child eat scraps from garbage bins while your family and your elders accumulated billions of Ryo in hidden vaults. Jiraiya closed his eyes for a brief moment, a single, heavy tear of absolute shame cutting through the dirt on his cheek. I spent 20 years wandering the world, fighting in the shadows, believing I was serving a holy ideal. I thought my master was the pinnacle of shinobi virtue. But you're just a pathetic old hypocrite, Hiruzen. You and the rest of the Konoha 4 turned the leaves of this village into a shield to protect your own personal assets. Hiruzen collapsed backward into his heavy leather chair, his spine completely bending under the weight of the accusation. He had no words left to defend himself. His oldest friend was a monster, his family was mutilated, his allies had bent the knee to the Uchiha, and now his favorite student was looking at him with nothing but pure, unadulterated disgust. Are you going to kill me too, Jiraiya? Hiruzen whispered, his voice cracking with an ultimate, hollow resignation. Kakashi left his blade here. If you wish to finish what he started, I will not resist. Killing you wouldn't solve a damn thing, Jiraiya spat, his eyes hardening into a cold, clinical detachment. If I kill you now, the village plunges into an immediate civil war, and the foreign nations will cross the borders by morning. The Hidden Leaf needs a leader, but it can never be you again. Your words are toxic. Your signature is worthless. The moment you step outside this tower, the people will tear you apart. Jiraiya reached down, his massive hand gripping the brim of the crimson and white Hokage hat that lay dusty on the corner of the desk. He lifted it up, staring at the kanji for fire embroidered on the silk. You are stepping down, Hiruzen. Tonight, Jiraiya commanded with absolute, unyielding finality. Pack your personal things and get out of this office. You are officially stripped of your administrative authority. Hiruzen looked up, his lips trembling. Step down. To whom, Jiraiya? The council elders are dead or compromised. The minor clans have already gathered inside the Uchiha compound. If I resign without naming a successor, the infrastructure will completely collapse. Then we find the next Hokage, Jiraiya said, tossing the sacred hat onto the desk right over the silver blade. And it isn't going to be me. I am too stained by your system to sit in that chair. Hiruzen blinked, his voice a panicked whisper. Then who? Who possesses the legendary reputation, the bloodline prestige, and the raw strength to challenge Ren Uchiha's Eternal Mangekyo? If you don't take the mantle, the Uchiha will march into this room tomorrow morning and declare an absolute dictatorship. There is only one person left who can anchor the people, Jiraiya replied, turning his back on the old man and walking toward the shattered window, staring out over the dark, silent village. The last true descendant of the Senju bloodline. The granddaughter of the first Hokage. Tsunade. Hiruzen whispered, his face twisting in a complex mix of dread and hope. I've already sent word through the Toad network, Jiraiya said, his white mantle catching the cold night wind. She already knows about the culling of the Senju youth detailed in the book. She is already on her way back to the village, and she is bringing a mountain of pure rage with her. If anyone can look Ren Uchiha in the eye and negotiate a distribution of power to save this village from total extinction, it's her. Jiraiya leapt onto the windowsill, his massive scroll shifting on his back as he prepared to vanish into the night to intercept his former teammate. He paused, looking back over his shoulder at the broken, weeping old man sitting in the dark office. Clean your desk, Hiruzen. Jiraiya's final words cut through the room like cold steel. When Tsunade enters these gates tomorrow morning, she will be holding the gavel. Pray that she decides to let you live in a cell, because if she decides to handle you according to Senju law, not even the heavens will be able to save your soul. With a swift fluid movement, Jiraiya vanished into the damp fog of the night, leaving Hiruzen Sarutobi completely alone in the ruins of his office. The sacred Hokage hat sat crooked against the cold silver blade, a silent, mocking monument to an empire that had officially run out of time. Chapter 18, The Toad and the Overlord. The architecture of the Uchiha Patriarch's study was built on sharp lines and deep shadows. Unlike the Hokage's office, which choked on the scent of stale tobacco and decaying scrolls, this room smelled of fresh cedar, polished steel, and a dense, cold vitality that seemed to hum from the very floorboards. Ren sat behind a minimalist desk of black walnut. His high-collared patriarch mantle rested elegantly over his shoulders. He didn't have his Sharingan active, his standard black eyes were perfectly calm, reflecting the flickering light of a lone iron lamp. SHF. The space in the center of the room didn't warp, but the ambient air pressure dropped instantly. Jiraiya of the Sannin materialized near the sliding screens, his massive frame casting a heavy shadow across the tatami mats. He didn't bring his weapons out, but his massive hands were curled into loose fists, and his chakra was leaking from his skin like a dense, suffocating weight. Ren didn't look up from the logistical scroll he was reviewing. He simply picked up a porcelain cup, pouring a stream of steaming green tea. The Toad Sage, Ren said, his voice entirely smooth, carrying a sharp, rhythmic clarity. Bypassing my perimeter guards without tripping the sound tags. I suppose 40 years of espionage work gives one excellent manners. Jiraiya didn't step closer, his bloodshot eyes fixed on the young Uchiha patriarch, searching for any sign of arrogance, fear, or malice. He found nothing but a vast, bottomless ocean of absolute indifference. I didn't come here to trade compliments, brat, Jiraiya said, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. I've seen the state of the village. I've seen the minor clans kneeling inside your courtyard. You've successfully paralyzed the Hokage Tower and turned the populace into an angry mob. I want to know what your end game is. Ren took a slow, elegant sip of his tea. My end game is quite simple, Jiraiya. The total purification of a corrupt system. The restructuring of the state under an absolute authority. An absolute authority. Jiraiya scoffed, taking a heavy step forward, his massive scroll shifting on his back. You call it purification, but you're just installing a dictatorship. You're building a throne out of fear. A peace built on a tyrant's strength never lasts, Ren. I've traveled the entire world. I've seen empires rise and fall under the boots of men like you. True peace only comes when people understand one another, when the hatred is washed away by mutual compromise. Ren slowly set his teacup back onto the dark wood. He raised his head, his black eyes locking onto Jiraiya's wrinkled face. Then, a soft, chilling laugh escaped his lips, a sound so filled with raw, unfiltered mockery that Jiraiya's brow furrowed in instant anger. Mutual compromise. Mutual understanding. Ren shook his head, his smile dripping with an icy disdain. Jiraiya, you are over 50 years old, yet your mind is still stuck in the naive pages of a children's fairy tale. You speak of peace as if it were a beautiful poem, while you spend your entire life running away from the very rot that feeds your home. Ren stood up slowly, his black mantle catching the dim lamp light. Let's talk about your precious peace, Toad Sage. Let's talk about your standard of morality. For decades, your teammate, Orochimaru, kidnapped hundreds of civilian children, minor clan heirs, and pregnant women from the borders of this very village. He sliced them open on cold stone slabs, grafting their flesh, draining their marrow, and turning human souls into mutated slurry. Jiraiya flinched, his jaw tightening as the dark memory of his fallen teammate flashed across his mind. Orochimaru was a criminal. The village exiled him only after his operations became too messy to hide. Ren roared, his voice cutting through the room like a cold steel blade, completely shattering Jiraiya's defensive stance. And what did you do, Jiraiya? You, the great legendary Sannin. You tracked him down. You cornered him at the border. You had the power and the military duty to put that rabid dog down and avenge the hundreds of slaughtered children of your village. Ren walked out from behind his desk, stepping right up into Jiraiya's personal space, his eyes narrowing into pitch black slits of pure contempt. But instead, you let him walk. You let him escape because of your pathetic, selfish, sentimental attachment to your childhood friend. You valued your personal nostalgia over the lives of every single child he has tortured and murdered since that day. That is your peace, Jiraiya. A peace where the innocent pay the blood bill so legends like you can feel noble in your grief. Jiraiya's breath caught in his throat. He opened his mouth to argue, but the sheer, undeniable weight of Ren's logic choked him. He had spent decades carrying the guilt of letting Orochimaru go, but to hear it dissected so ruthlessly by a 15-year-old boy stripped away his remaining pride. And let's look at your personal lifestyle, Ren continued, his voice dropping into a dangerous, mocking whisper that carried a sickening level of clarity. The great Toad Sage. The famous author. The entire village knows you spend your leisure hours hiding in the bushes of hot springs, peeping at civilian women, bathing girls, and the wives of loyal shinobi while they are vulnerable. That's just research for my novels. Jiraiya stuttered, his face flushing a furious, panicked red as he tried to defend his eccentric persona. It's harmless. It has nothing to do with the politics of the state, harmless. Ren cut him off, a demonic, predatory glint flashing within his dark eyes. He leaned in closer, his voice vibrating with a terrifying, psychological intensity. Let me ask you a hypothetical question, Jiraiya. Since you find it so amusing, let's bring it close to home. Ren raised a single finger, pointing it directly at Jiraiya's chest. Imagine a man, a filthy, degenerate stranger, sneaking through the shadows of your ancestral home. Imagine him pressing his eyes against the wooden screens, salivating as he watches your own mother bathing. Imagine him tracking your sister, your daughter, or the woman you love, watching them in their most private, sacred moments of vulnerability, treating their dignity like a piece of cheap entertainment for his private amusement. Jiraiya's face went from panicked red to a sudden, deathly pale white. His breathing hitched, his heart hammering against his ribs as the raw, visceral image Ren had painted slammed into his mind. Tell me, legendary Sannin, Ren hissed, his words dripping with pure venom. If you caught that man outside your daughter's window, would you offer him mutual understanding? Would you sit down with him over a cup of tea and discuss a mutual compromise to wash away the hatred? Or would you use your Rasengan to crush his skull into a fine red paste? The silence that followed was absolute. Jiraiya stood frozen, his large frame trembling slightly. The moral high ground he had walked into the room with had been completely obliterated. Ren hadn't used a single drop of chakra, yet he had stripped away Jiraiya's legendary status, exposing him as a hypocrite who let mass murderers escape out of sentimentality while indulging in behavior that would get any ordinary civilian executed for degeneracy. You don't understand the burden of leadership, Jiraiya whispered hoarsely, his hands shaking as he looked away from the young patriarch's piercing gaze. I understand it perfectly, Ren said, turning his back in the Sannin and walking calmly back to his desk. Leadership is not about writing novels or weeping over the graves of the people you failed to protect. It is about having the absolute ruthlessness to pull the weeds out before they choke the garden. The Konoha 4 used your naivety to keep you away from the village while they harvested your bloodlines. They turned you into a wandering fool. Ren sat back down in his black walnut chair, crossing his arms over his chest. His ordinary black eyes instantly flushed into the intricate, blade-encircled crimson galaxy of his Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. The sudden, dense pressure of his ocular chakra erupted through the study, forcing the paper screens to rattle violently against their wooden frames. Tomorrow morning, Tsunade enters these gates, Ren announced, his voice carrying the finality of a judge delivering a death sentence. She is coming to claim a chair that no longer belongs to her bloodline. If she comes to swear fealty and help me rebuild the state, the Uchiha will grant her a place of honor. But if she comes with your hollow sermons about the will of fire, I will use her own grandfather's wood style to bury the Senju name permanently into the dirt. Ren waved his hand dismissively, the spatial vortex around his body beginning to ripple slightly as a warning. Get out of my study, Jiraiya. Go find your teammate. And advise her very carefully. Because the eyes of the Uchiha are no longer looking for diplomats. They are looking for subjects. With a soft rustle of wind, the pressure in the room snapped back to normal. Jiraiya stood alone in the shadows for a long, agonizing moment, his spirit completely hollowed out before turning around and slipping out into the freezing fog of the night, knowing that the tomorrow he was bringing to Konoha was going to be a baptism of blood. Chapter 19, The Last Leaf of the Forest. The morning sun broke through the heavy Konoha fog, casting pale, golden light over the main gates of the Hidden Leaf. The air was unseasonably cold, thick with the scent of dew and the lingering tension of a collapsing regime. Tsunade of the Sannin walked through the threshold of the village she had abandoned years ago. She wore her traditional green haori, her arms crossed over her chest. Beside her, Shizune walked with quiet, nervous steps, clutching the pig, Tauntaun, tightly to her chest. Jiraiya followed a few paces behind, his head bowed, unusually silent after his confrontation with Ren the night before. Tsunade didn't march toward the Hokage Tower. She didn't seek out her broken master, Hiruzen Sarutobi. Her amber eyes, heavy with decades of grief and a new, burning bitterness born from reading the Ledger of the Damned, were fixed entirely on the administrative plaza below the monument. There, standing completely alone beneath the shadow of the great stone faces, was Ren Uchiha. He didn't wear battle armor. He wore the high-collared, flowing black mantle of the Uchiha patriarch. His standard black eyes were calm and unblinking as they watched the legendary medical ninja approach. There were no guards surrounding him, no weapons drawn. The interaction was devoid of the violent, explosive chakra flare most villagers expected. It was completely, unnaturally quiet. You didn't go to see your teacher, Ren observed, his voice smooth and clear, carrying across the empty stone plaza. Tsunade stopped 10 paces away from him. She didn't unleash her monstrous strength. She simply stared at the teenage boy who had systematically dismantled the executive leadership of the Leaf in less than a week. Why would I visit a graveyard? Tsunade countered, her voice carrying a deep, gravelly exhaustion. Hiruzen is a ghost sitting in a hollow room. The men who called my family are already dead or locked away. I came back because Jiraiya told me the village was on the verge of tearing itself apart. But looking at you, it seems you've already stitched it back together under your own banner. Ren let out a soft, rhythmic hum, taking a slow step forward. I didn't stitch it, Tsunade. I merely removed the parasites that were draining its life force. Your grandfather, Hashirama Senju, and Madara Uchiha built this village to be a sanctuary for their clans. But the moment Madara left and Hashirama passed, the system was hijacked by politicians who turned your bloodlines into a harvest. Tsunade's jaw tightened. She reached into her haori, her fingers tightening around the copy of the ledger she had carried across the country. The book. The files on the Senju youth assigned to high mortality missions. They were real. Every single line, Ren said, his gaze unwavering. Between the Second and Third Shinobi World Wars, over 300 pure-blooded Senju were systematically funneled into suicide operations by Homura and Kaharu, under the passive gaze of Hiruzen. Their bodies were routed to Danzo's subterranean facilities. Why? Because the Konoha 4 could never allow a true Senju heir to rise and challenge their administrative monopoly. They praised your grandfather's will of fire while they quietly salted the earth so his seeds could never grow again. A profound, suffocating silence descended upon the plaza. Jiraiya looked away, unable to meet Tsunade's eyes. Shizune bit her lip, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. Tsunade didn't erupt in rage. Instead, her shoulders slumped, a deep, hollow sigh escaping her lips. The anger that had fueled her journey back to the village seemed to evaporate, leaving behind nothing but the cold, crushing weight of reality. The stupidity of it. Tsunade whispered, her eyes drifting upward toward the carved stone face of her grandfather on the monument. The absolute, naive stupidity of the Senju clan's choices. Ren watched her silently, noting the raw desolation in her posture. My grandfather believed in the collective, Tsunade said, her voice trembling slightly with an ancient bitterness. He believed that if the Senju dissolved themselves into the village, if we married into the civilian population, abandoned our clan identity, and trusted that system, we would create a family that spanned the entire nation. He forced our people to abandon the Senju name to prove his devotion to peace. She looked back at Ren, her eyes reflecting a tragic, undeniable truth. And what did it get us? The Uchiha held on to their compound. They held on to their pride, their military structure, and their name. They stayed a clan. And because you stayed a clan, you survived. You have hundreds of members walking these streets right now, ready to fight under your command. But me. Tsunade gestured to herself, a hollow, self-deprecating laugh escaping her throat. I am the last one. The Senju clan is just me, a wandering gambler who ran away from her own shadow. We gave up everything for the village, and the village rewarded us by hunting our children in the dark until there was nothing left but a name on a stone wall. It's a sad reality, Ren. A pathetic, solitary reality. The confession was raw, stripped of the legendary Sannin armor. Tsunade wasn't speaking as a political rival, she was speaking as the final survivor of a discarded lineage, recognizing the fatal structural flaw of her grandfather's grand experiment. Hashirama's pacifism had effectively castrated his own clan, leaving them completely vulnerable to the administrative scalpels of the Konoha 4. Ren took another step closer, his expression shifting into one of majestic, unyielding clarity. Your grandfather was a god of shinobi, Tsunade, but he was a failure as a patriarch, Ren said, his voice carrying the absolute weight of a new era. He traded the tangible survival of his kin for the abstract concept of a village. True peace cannot be maintained by a shared sermon. It can only be secured by a sovereign power that possesses the ruthlessness to protect its own. Ren extended his right hand toward her, his palm open. The Senju clan is gone, but the power of your grandfather doesn't have to die with it. The Uchiha have taken the throne because we kept our blades sharp and our blood pure. I am not your enemy, Tsunade. I am the executioner who avenged your cousins. If you take the mantle of the fifth Hokage under my administration, you will not be a shield for corrupt elders. You will be the legendary anchor of a new, unified state. Tsunade stared at his open hand for a long, agonizing moment. She knew the terms. Ren wasn't offering her an independent throne, he was offering her a place within his new hierarchy. The Uchiha were the master now, and any Hokage who sat in that tower would answer directly to the patriarch. She looked back at the village, listening to the distant, chaotic murmurs of the populace who had completely lost faith in the old ways. She looked at Jiraiya, who stood broken and silent, and then at the hundreds of Uchiha flags fluttering proudly over the eastern compounds. I don't care about the chair, Ren, Tsunade said quietly, her voice hardening with a cold, definitive resolve. But I will not let this village collapse into ash. If you can guarantee that the remaining minor clans are protected, and that no more children are slaughtered in the dark for the sake of an elder's bank account, then I will take the hat. I don't make promises, Tsunade, Ren replied, his black eyes instantly flushing into the intricate, blade-encircled crimson galaxy of his Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, pulsing with a boundless, godlike authority. I enforce realities. Under my shadow, Konoha will either prosper, or it will cease to exist. The choice is yours. Tsunade closed her eyes, bowing her head in a subtle, quiet nod of absolute political acceptance. The final descendant of the Senju had chosen her path. She had chosen to survive under the wing of the Overlord rather than drown in the ruins of her grandfather's dream. Chapter 20, The Jester of the Leaf. The morning light crept higher over the plaza, casting sharp, elongated shadows across the stone courtyard. Tsunade's quiet political acceptance had settled the immediate air, but the underlying tension remained as heavy as a physical weight. Jiraiya stood with his hands tucked into his massive sleeves, his expression a complicated mask of relief and lingering dread. Ren slowly deactivated his eyes, letting the crimson rings recede into the deep, unblinking black of his ordinary gaze. He turned his head slightly, his eyes drifting away from the Sannin and toward the bustling, chaotic streets of the commercial district in the distance. Since you have agreed to anchor the state, Tsunade, there is one final piece of the old administration's debris that we must address, Ren said, his voice dropping into a casual, rhythmic cadence that somehow carried a chilling level of precision. A piece that your teammate has spent the last 12 years desperately hiding from the world. Jiraiya's posture instantly stiffened, his eyes narrowing as he took a half step forward. If you're talking about the boy. If you're talking about Naruto, Ren, you leave him out of this. He's just a child. He has nothing to do with the corruption of the Konoha 4. A child. Ren let out a short, quiet laugh, a sound completely devoid of amusement, dripping with pure, clinical mockery. He turned fully to face the two Sannin. Jiraiya, you call that creature a child? I call him a sad, exceptionally stupid jester dancing in a theater of your master's design. Watch your mouth, brat. Jiraiya growled, his chakra flaring instinctively, the heavy concrete beneath his sandals' hairline cracking under the sudden spike of energy. He is Minato's son. He carries the fate of this village inside his belly. And that is exactly why he is a tragic joke, Ren countered, his voice cutting through Jiraiya's chakra pressure like a scalpel through silk. Look at him. Minato Namikaze gave his life, his soul, and the future of his lineage to seal the 9 tails inside that boy. He died believing the village would look upon his son as a hero, as the ultimate shield of the leaf. Ren stepped closer, his gaze locking onto Tsunade, who was listening with a furrowed brow. But what did your master, Hiruzen, do? He took Minato's legacy and turned it into a psychological weapon. He leaked the boy's status as a Jinchuriki to the public, ensuring that every civilian, every orphan, and every widow of the 9 tails tragedy would project their raw, unfiltered hatred onto a toddler. He isolated the boy, forced him to live in an empty apartment on a measly allowance, and let him eat expired instant ramen from the trash while the Sarutobi vaults choked on the war funds Minato had secured. Tsunade's face darkened, her amber eyes flashing with a sudden, sharp disgust. She had known the boy existed, but hearing the clinical breakdown of his daily reality made her chest tighten with a familiar, burning anger toward her old teacher. And how did the boy respond to this systematic psychological torture? Ren continued, his lips curling into a sharp, mocking smile. If he had a shred of his father's genius, or his mother's fiery Uzumaki pride, he would have spent every waking second training in the dark. He would have looked at this hypocritical village with a cold, unyielding hatred. He would have bided his time, waiting for the day he could rip the seal open and let the fox reduce these streets to a sea of glass. Ren shook his head, a deep sigh of utter contempt escaping his lips. But instead, he paints the faces of the Hokage monument with orange paint. He screams in the middle of the streets, begging for the attention of the very shopkeepers who kick him out of their stores. He wears a bright orange jumpsuit, a literal neon target for enemy assassins, and runs around the village shouting about how he wants to become the next Hokage so everyone will finally recognize him. He's lonely, Ren. Jiraiya shouted, his fists clenching so tightly his knuckles turned white. He's a 12-year-old kid who has never known the warmth of a family. His antics are the only way he knows how to cope with the isolation. No, Jiraiya. His antics are the proof that your master's brainwashing was flawless, Ren said, his voice dropping into a freezing, definitive register. Hiruzen didn't just isolate him, he castrated his mind. He fed the boy cheap, romantic garbage about the will of fire. He visited his apartment once a month, handed him a handful of pocket change, and gave him a gentle smile. And that sad, stupid kid swallowed it whole. He loves the very system that keeps him in chains. He worships the stone face of the old man who ruined his life. Ren took a slow step toward the edge of the plaza, looking down at a distant rooftop where a faint, erratic chakra signature was moving, Naruto, likely running away from an academy instructor after another failed prank. He is a weapon of the state that has been trained to love its own master, Ren whispered, his words carrying a devastating clarity. He is an absolute embarrassment to the Uzumaki name. His cousin, Nagato, is currently out in the wider world, using the power of the gods to reshape the nations through blood and iron. But the prince of the Uzumaki lineage in Konoha is currently crying because he failed his transformation jutsu for the 5th time this week. Tsunade closed her eyes, a heavy, suffocating weight pressing down on her shoulders. As the last true member of the two founding clans, looking at the absolute state of the village's final Jinchuriki was a painful, humiliating revelation. The Uzumaki, the proud, terrifying masters of sealing jutsu who once made the entire world tremble, had been reduced to a loud, uneducated orphan who didn't even know his own mother's name. What do you plan to do with him, Ren? Tsunade asked quietly, opening her eyes, her voice completely devoid of its usual explosive edge. If you take total control of the military infrastructure, the Jinchuriki is the ultimate variable. Are you going to lock him away? Harvest the fox. Harvest it. Why would I waste my time on a feral beast? Ren asked, turning back to face her. His ordinary black eyes instantly flushed into the blade-encircled crimson galaxy of his Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, pulsing with a dense, godlike authority that made the surrounding air vibrate. I have no interest in torturing a jester, Tsunade. As long as he remains stupid, and as long as he continues to dance for his ramen, I will let him live his little fairy tale. He will be a perfect, obedient tool for your new administration. When the foreign villages look at Konoha, they will see a loud, orange idiot running around the streets, completely unaware that the real power of the leaf has shifted into the shadow of the Uchiha. Ren crossed his arms over his chest, his black mantle catching the sharp morning wind. But the moment he breaks that script, the moment his little fox attempts to bare its teeth against my new order, I will use your grandfather's wood style to pin that beast to the dirt, and I will erase the boy's existence so thoroughly that not even his name will remain in the records. He is a tool, Tsunade. Treat him as one. Jiraiya stood silent, his jaw clenched, completely unable to find a counter-argument. Ren's words were a brutal, unforgiving mirror that stripped away the romanticized illusions of the leaf, leaving behind nothing but the cold, clinical truth of a weaponized orphan. Ren turned his back on them, his body beginning to ripple and distort as the spatial vortex of his left eye opened in the dark. The inauguration ceremony is scheduled for tomorrow at noon. Ren's final commands echoed through the plaza as his form began to spiral inward into the void. Prepare your robes, 5th Hokage. The people are waiting to see their new anchor. And the shadow that guides her hand. With a soft, violent rustle of wind, Ren vanished from the plaza, leaving the two remaining legends of the old era standing alone in the cold morning light, staring down at a village that had officially run out of fairy tales. Chapter 21, The Autumn of the Council. The sub-basement of the Central Penitentiary was a place where the concept of time lost its meaning. Built from dense, chakra-suppressing stone blocks and buried deep beneath the roots of the village, it was a dark, silent vault designed to hold the state's most terrifying secrets. Tonight, the deepest cell held 3 old people. The security seals on the heavy iron doors had been cracked open not by an enemy force, but by the hollow remnants of the Konoha administration itself. Inside the dim room, illuminated only by a single, sputtering oil lamp, the surviving members of the Konoha 4 sat together for the very first time since their world had turned to ash. Danzo Shimura lay flat on a stone cot, his breathing a wet, shallow rattle through the medical tubes hooked into his chest. His right arm was gone, cleanly severed at the shoulder, and his right eye socket was a hollow, bandaged crater. Beside him, propped up against the cold stone wall, was Hiruzen Sarutobi, his fingers loosely gripping his cold iron pipe. Sitting on a wooden stool across from them was the spiritless, pale form of Koharu Uchiha, or rather, what Hiruzen believed to be Koharu. In reality, Ren's absolute mastery of his Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan had placed a perfect, localized visual illusion over her dried, lifeless corpse, allowing Hiruzen to believe his entire council was still unified for one final evening. The wind outside. It smells like rain again, Hiruzen whispered, his voice sounding incredibly thin, like old parchment tearing in the dark. Danzo let out a weak, coughing rasp, his single left eye staring blankly up at the damp concrete ceiling. Let it rain, Hiruzen. The village we built. The walls we spent 40 years sealing with blood. They don't belong to us anymore. The Uchiha flags are flying over the administrative plaza. The 3 of them fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Surrounded by the cold stone of their own prison, their minds naturally drifted away from the chaotic, mocking murmurs of the current village, escaping backward into a past that felt as distant as a dream. Do you remember? The first Hokage's garden. Koharu's illusionary voice echoed softly, her eyes staring into the sputtering lamp flame. When we were children in the academy, Lord Hashirama would sit beneath the great oak tree, laughing as he handed us sweet bean cakes. He used to ruffle your hair, Hiruzen, and tell us that we were the buds that would grow into a grand forest. A faint, ghostly smile played at the edge of Hiruzen's wrinkled lips. I remember. And Lord Tobarama. He was so strict. He would make us run the obstacle courses until our lungs burned, but every time we tripped, his shadow clones would catch us before we hit the rocks. He taught us that a shinobi's blade must be sharp, but his heart must be a shield for his comrades. We were so naive back then, Danzo muttered, his left hand clenching into a weak fist against the thin blanket. We believed every word of the sermon. We genuinely thought that if we worked hard enough, if we gave our lives for the collective, the fire would burn bright forever. Hiruzen slowly lowered his head, his hands trembling as he rested them against his knees. Where did it change, Danzo? When did we stop being the shields? And start becoming the scalpels? The question hung in the dark room like an unexploded seal. Hiruzen's mind raced backward through the decades, sorting through the bloody archives of his memory. He remembered the exact moment the purity of their youth had fractured. It was during the First Shinobi World War, when Lord Tobarama had stood in the middle of a burning clearing, choosing to act as a decoy to save his students from the elite Kinkaku force. From this day forward, you are the Hokage, Hiruzen. Those had been his master's final words. And that was the exact day the weight of the Crimson Hat had slammed into Hiruzen's soul, changing his perspective forever. It was the fear, Hiruzen whispered, his eyes widening slightly as the raw, unfiltered truth of his own corruption finally unveiled itself in his mind. The absolute, paralyzing fear of losing the haven our teachers died to build. When the Second War broke out, and the reports of dead genin began to pile onto my desk, I realized that the romantic ideals of Lord Hashirama couldn't stop an enemy kunai. We needed a shadow. We needed a mechanism that didn't care about morality. I became that mechanism, Danzo wheezed, a bitter, proud glint flashing briefly within his single eye. I built Root because you didn't have the stomach to do the butchering, Hiruzen. I stole the wealth, I delayed the reinforcements, and I culled the bloodlines because every single independent power inside these walls was a variable that could compromise the stability of the state. I sacrificed the few to save the many. No, we didn't sacrifice the few to save the many, Danzo, Hiruzen said, a single, heavy tear of pure, unadulterated clarity sliding down his wrinkled cheek, dropping into the dark dirt of the cell. We sacrificed them to save our own control. The realization slammed into Hiruzen's chest like a physical blow, stripping away his final defense. For 40 years, he had wrapped his sins in the beautiful, holy philosophy of the will of fire. He had convinced himself that letting the Uzumaki die, letting the Senju be culled, and driving Sakumo Hitaki to suicide were all necessary evils to preserve the peace, but looking at the cold, empty stone walls of his prison, the illusion completely evaporated. We grew greedy, Hiruzen choked out, his voice cracking with a sudden, overwhelming wave of profound grief. We fell in love with our own positions. We saw the independent growth of the Uchiha, the Senju, and the minor clans not as assets to the village, but as threats to our own chairs. We used the name of the leaf to systematically weaken everyone around us, hoarding the riches and the power within our own private lineages while telling the rest of the world to die for the collective. He looked across the dim room at the silent, motionless illusion of Kaharu, and then down at the bleeding, limbless torso of his oldest friend. And now, the heavens have delivered the ultimate verdict, Hiruzen whispered, a dry, pathetic laugh escaping his lips. I wanted to protect my family's legacy. I wanted the Sarutobi clan to prosper above all others. And what happened? My son is a cripple. My grandson has no hands. My entire military lineage has been butchered by the very weapon we spent decades sharpening in the dark. Itachi Uchiha was our ultimate creation. And he turned around and burned my house to ash. Hiruzen closed his eyes, a deep, hollow understanding washing over his soul. For the first time, he truly understood the words Tsunade had spoken to Ren at the village gates. He understood the sad, solitary reality of a leader who had compromised everything only to end up completely alone in the dark. The Sarutobi clan was no longer a proud dynasty, it was a collection of cold graves and mangled survivors. He had tried to play God with the bloodlines of the leaf, and the world had responded by stripping away every single thing he had ever sought to protect, leaving him to rot inside a cage of his own design. We failed our teachers, Danzo, Hiruzen said quietly, leaning his head back against the concrete wall, completely abandoning his iron pipe. We became the very demons Lord Hashirama spent his life trying to erase from the world. We turned the fire into a furnace. And now, the flames have finally come back to consume our own roots. Danzo didn't answer. His single left eye remained fixed on the ceiling, his breathing growing slower and heavier as the dark silence of the sub-basement claimed their final meeting. The Konoha Four had unified their front one last time, not to issue a decree or plan a war, but to sit together in the quiet dark, choking on the bitter, unyielding taste of their own medicine while a new, absolute master prepared to rewrite their history. Chapter 22, The Broken White Fang. The moon above the hidden leaf village was high, sharp, and cast in a pale, sickle-like silver light. The cold wind blowing from the north carried the smell of ozone and wet ash, keeping the civilian sectors locked tight behind shuttered windows. Inside the graveyard of the Hitaki clan, Kakashi stood alone before a solitary stone monument. The surrounding grounds were choked with weeds, the wooden fences rotted from decades of neglect. This was the reality of his lineage. The Hitaki were not a sprawling dynasty like the Hyuga or the resurrected Uchiha. They were a minor line, a family of hunters, and with his father's suicide, Kakashi had become the absolute end of his name. The system. It was a political necessity to preserve the system. Hiruzen Sarutobi's weak, trembling defense echoed inside Kakashi's head, repeating with a rhythmic, maddening frequency that made the blood behind his left eye burn like white phosphorus. Kakashi stared at the sleek white light chakra saber resting in his palm. The steel blade was nicked, scarred by 100 battles fought in service to the leaf. For 20 years, he had forced himself to be the perfect, obedient tool. He had let his teammates die, he had buried his feelings, and he had worn the porcelain mask of the Anbu, believing he was honoring his father's memory by protecting the village that Sakumo had supposedly failed, but it was all a beautifully orchestrated lie. His father hadn't broken the sacred rules of a noble system. His father had been hunted to death by a committee of corrupt politicians who used the public propaganda network to break his spirit, ensuring that the White Fang's immense popularity among the common shinobi would never threaten Hiruzen Sarutobi's re-election as Hokage. You died for nothing, father, Kakashi whispered, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that was instantly swallowed by the cold wind. You saved your comrades, and the men who sat behind the desks turned your compassion into the knife that cut your throat. Kakashi slowly reached up, his fingers catching the edge of his forehead protector. With a single, sharp jerk, he ripped the metal plate from his head, letting the Konoha insignia clatter uselessly onto the dirt before his father's grave. He opened his left eye. The crimson iris of his three-tomo Sharingan spun instantly into the intricate, overlapping three-pronged pinwheel of the Mangekyo Sharingan. A bottomless, dark abyss of absolute disillusionment consumed his soul. The Uchiha patriarch, Ren, had used psychological manipulation to break the village, but Kakashi didn't care about Ren's new order. He didn't care about the throne. He only cared about the debt. The Sarutobi clan had already been reaped by Itachi and Obito, their compounds turned into smoking, black-charred ruins. The Mitokado clan had been found extinct in their beds, their hearts spontaneously collapsed, only one lineage remains fully untouched, Kakashi thought, his Mangekyo spinning with a lethal, hyper-focused intensity. The Uchiha clan. Elder Kaharu's blood. If the system was built on the blood of heroes, then the final families of the architects who designed that system had to be torn out by the roots. The last leaf of the Hitaki clan would not wither in the dark, it would become a guillotine. The Uchiha clan compound sat near the western administrative sector of the village, surrounded by high stone walls and guarded by 40 elite private sensory ninja. Following the sudden, natural death of Elder Kaharu in her sleep that morning, the compound had been placed under complete military lockdown. The guards were stationed every 5 paces along the perimeter, their chakra networks fully flared to detect any incoming spatial distortion or foreign signature. They were prepared for the Uchiha. They were prepared for rogue missing nin, they were not prepared for the copy ninja of the leaf, SHF. A single silhouette dropped from the dark sky, landing silently atop the outer wall. Before the nearest sensory guard could turn his head, Kakashi's right hand erupted into a blinding, deafening roar of blue-white electricity. Reikiri. The high-voltage current didn't just pierce the guard's chest, it sheared through his entire torso with a terrifying velocity, vaporizing the bone and flesh before a single drop of blood could hit the ground. Kakashi didn't pause. Moving with a fluid, lethal speed that had been honed through thousands of Black Ops executions, he sprinted along the perimeter ledge. Spurt. 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 The lightning blade in his hand didn't fade. It hissed and screamed through the damp night air, slicing through throats, splitting skulls, and severing limbs with a brutal, mechanical precision. The sensory guards didn't even get the chance to raise an alarm. Kakashi knew every blind spot in the village's defensive architecture, he had helped design them during his tenure as an Anbu captain. He slipped through the sliding doors of the main residential pavilion like an invisible current of death. Inside the elegant, silk-paneled bedrooms, the extended family of Kaharu Uchiha, her nephews, her cousins, her grandchildren, and the administrators who managed the clan's hoarded wealth, were awakened not by a roar, but by the smell of ozone and the sudden, rhythmic thud of bodies hitting the floorboards. Kakashi was entirely ruthless. The naivety that had kept him bound to the will of fire for 20 years was gone, replaced by the ancient, cold instinct of a Hitaki hunter. He moved from room to room, his Mangekyo Sharingan tracking the heat signatures through the thin paper shoji screens. A civilian woman from the Uchiha line opened her eyes only to see a silver-haired phantom standing over her bed, his left eye glowing like a demonic red coal in the dark. Before she could gasp, a precise surge of lightning chakra fried her brain stem, ending her life in a millisecond. In the main corridor, 3 private Jonin attempted to form a defensive line, their hands blurring through hand signs to unleash an Earth-style wall. Kamui. Kakashi's left eye focused on the space between them. The air violently twisted into a spatial vortex, warping the stone floor and pulling the upper torsos of all 3 Jonin directly into the dimensional void, snapping their spines like dry twigs. The lower halves of their bodies collapsed forward, pouring dark crimson onto the polished cedar wood. For 45 minutes, the Uchiha estate became a silent, isolated slaughterhouse. Kakashi didn't use large, explosive techniques that would alert the wider village, he used the surgical, close-quarters assassination style that Hiruzen Sarutobi had taught him to use against foreign targets. Every strike was a precise, bitter execution. 92 members of the Uchiha bloodline, the entire lineage that had profited from the destruction of the Uzumaki, the culling of the Senju, and the engineered suicide of his father, were systematically put down. By the time the moon began to slide behind the western mountains, Kakashi stood in the center of the grand ancestral hall of the Uchiha. The floorboards were soaked in a thick, steaming sea of crimson. 92 corpses lay scattered across the pavilions, their lives cleanly snuffed out. The private wealth of the clan, the scrolls detailing hidden vaults and stolen mission taxes, sat scattered across the blood-stained mats, completely worthless to the dead. Kakashi lowered his white lightsaber, the blue lightning slowly fading from the steel. His breathing was shallow, his left eye pouring a steady stream of fresh, dark blood down his pale cheek, a heavy price for the excessive use of his Mangekyo. He didn't look at the carnage with satisfaction or joy. His face remained an empty, hollow mask. He had delivered the final bill, but the code of the Hitaki provided no peace, only a quiet, final clarity. The dead is settled, father, Kakashi whispered, his voice echoing off the silent, bloody walls of the hall. He slowly turned around, stepping over the corpses as he walked out into the open courtyard. The freezing rain began to fall again, washing the fresh blood from his silver hair and his dark clothes. He didn't return to his clan's compound. He didn't seek out the Hokage Tower. He simply walked toward the main gates of the Hidden Leaf, a solitary, broken blade disappearing into the dark mist of the wider world, having officially erased the final executive bloodline of the old regime from the face of the earth. An hour later, the dawn broke over Konoha, revealing the absolute completion of the purge. The Konoha four clans were officially extinct or ruined. The Shimura were leaderless, the Mitokado were gone, the Sarutobi were reduced to ashes, and now the Uchiha were a graveyard. The old administration had been entirely decapitated, not by a foreign invasion, but by the very weapons and secrets they had spent 40 years trying to control. From the top of the Hokage monument, Ren Uchiha stood watching the smoke rise from the western sector, his heavy black mantle catching the sharp morning wind. His Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan spun in slow, majestic rotations, tracking the empty path Kakashi had taken out of the village gates. Ding! The sharp crystalline chime of the Overlord System echoed sharply within his mind, pulsing with a brilliant, golden light that illuminated his thoughts. System announcement: complete annihilation of the Konoha 4 achieved. Mission status: 4/4 Elder Clans 100% wiped off. The old political structure has been completely demolished. Grand completion reward triggered. The crown of the first sovereign unlocks the ultimate ability to manipulate the village architecture and terraform the surrounding land using the fully integrated high-tier wood style. Ren's lips curled into a slow, majestic smile. The stage was finally completely clean. The old ghosts were dead, the minor clans had sworn fealty, and Tsunade was ready to take the stage. The autumn is over, Ren whispered to the wind, his hand gripping the edge of the stone monument until the solid rock cracked under his fingers. Tomorrow, the new forest rises. And it will grow entirely under the shadow of the Uchiha. Chapter 23, The Final Verdict. The dark, stagnant air inside the sub-basement of the central penitentiary felt thicker than usual, heavy with the suffocating weight of absolute despair. The lone oil lamp on the stone floor sputtered weakly, its low orange flame casting long, dancing shadows that stretched across the weeping concrete walls. Hiruzen Sarutobi sat with his back pressed against the cold stone, his chin resting against his chest. His breathing was shallow, a dry, hollow sound that echoed softly in the claustrophobic silence. Beside him, Danzo Shimura lay motionless on the low cot, his single left eye staring blankly into the shadows, his face pale and entirely devoid of the ruthless authority he had carried for decades. Click, the heavy iron mechanism of the cell door didn't slide open with its usual mechanical rumble. Instead, the thick metal simply warped, bending outward as if the very fabric of space was rejecting its existence. Homura and Kaharu's illusionary figures vanished instantly into a mist of gray light, exposing the grim reality. Kaharu's actual, desiccated corpse slumped over the small wooden stool, and the empty space where Homura should have been. The absolute visual genjutsu that had kept Hiruzen blind to his counsel's true status shattered into nothingness. Ren Uchiha stepped through the threshold. He wore his high-collared, flowing black patriarch mantle, the silver fan embroidered across his back gleaming in the dim light. His arms were crossed over his chest, his posture radiating a terrifying, majestic calm. He didn't have his Sharingan active, his standard black eyes looked down at the two remaining elders with a cold, piercing indifference. I brought you some news from the surface, Lord Third, Ren said, his voice smooth, echoing with a sharp, clinical clarity that cut through the silence of the tomb. Hiruzen slowly raised his head, his dull, bloodshot eyes blinking weakly under the dim light. A deep, instinctual dread gripped his chest, though he had nothing left to lose. The inauguration. Tsunade has taken the hat, hasn't she? The minor clans have abandoned the tower. Tsunade will take the mantle tomorrow at noon, Ren replied, a soft, mocking smile playing at the edge of his lips. But that isn't the news I came to deliver. 3 hours ago, the western administrative sector of the village was completely cleansed. The Uchiha clan estate was turned into a silent slaughterhouse. 92 souls, the entire remaining lineage of Elder Kaharu, were systematically put down. Danzo's single eye widened sharply, a wet, choking gasp escaping his throat as he thrashed weakly against his thin blanket. Kaharu. Her clan. Who did it? Was it your Uchiha dogs? No, Ren said, his voice dropping into a freezing register that sent shivers down Hiruzen's spine. The Uchiha clan was tucked safely inside our compound, preparing for the festival. The executioner was one of your own, Hiruzen. It was Kakashi Hatake. Boom, the revelation slammed into Hiruzen's chest like a physical blow. His jaw slackened, his lips trembling violently as his mind completely stalled. Kakashi. The boy he had watched over, the son of the White Fang whom he had personally funneled into the Anbu to use as a loyal tool for the administration. He read the book, Hiruzen, Ren continued ruthlessly, his words cutting through the old man's defenses like hot iron. He read the cipher keys detailing how your council engineered his father's social isolation and pushed him to slit his own throat just to secure your re-election as Hokage. He understood the mathematics of your system. And tonight, he decided to collect the debt. He wiped out the Uchiha line, drove his lightning blade through their hearts, and walked out of the village gates forever, leaving his Konoha protector in the dirt. Hiruzen buried his face in his wrinkled, trembling hands, a deep guttural sob escaping his throat. It was too much. The weight of his 40 years of necessary darkness had completely collapsed upon his head, crushing every single legacy he had ever sought to build. The Sarutobi clan was a smoking ruin, his own grandson a handless cripple. The Mitokado were extinct. The Shimura were leaderless. And now, the Uchiha had been entirely reaped by the very child Hiruzen had broken to serve the state. The Konoha Four were officially the final leaves of an extinct forest, their entire lineages erased from the pages of history by the very weapons they had spent decades sharpening in the dark. We were wrong, Danzo. Hiruzen wept into his palms, his voice a pathetic, broken whisper that carried no trace of the legendary god of shinobi. We were so terribly, monstrously wrong. Lord Hashirama didn't build this village to be a butcher shop for its own children. We thought we were protecting the tree, but we were just the rot that was eating the roots. Shut up, Hiruzen. Danzo wheezed, blood bubbling past his lips as his chest heaved in a manic, desperate panic. He looked at Ren, his single eye flashing with a terrifying, useless venom. We did what had to be done. The Uchiha were an unstable element. The Senju were a threat to the balance. If we hadn't taken control, the village would have burned in the first war. And look at it now, Danzo, Ren mocked, stepping closer, his ordinary black eyes instantly flushing into the intricate, blade-encircled crimson galaxy of his Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. The sudden, dense pressure of his ocular chakra erupted through the narrow cell, causing the concrete walls to groan and hairline fracture under the immense spiritual weight. The sputtering oil lamp instantly froze, its flame locking into a solid, jagged shard of static orange light. Chronos stop. Snap, the universe slammed into absolute, suffocating stillness. The tears flying from Hiruzen's face froze midair, suspended like glass beads. Danzo's frantic, desperate breathing stopped dead, his mouth locked open in a silent scream of panic. In the quiet, motionless vacuum of stop time, Ren calmly walked over to the stone cot. His face was a mask of cold, unyielding iron, the look of an absolute overlord delivering the final sentence to a broken regime. He didn't use a blade. He extended his right hand, his fingers transforming into thin, razor-sharp wooden tendrils made of compressed, high-density Senju cells, the ultimate mastery of his newly integrated high-tier wood style. With dual, surgical precision, Ren drove the wooden tendrils straight through the foreheads of both Danzo and Hiruzen, piercing their brains simultaneously. He didn't extract their chakra, he injected a localized pulse of his own Mokuden life energy, forcing the cells within their skulls to rapidly calcify, turning their brains into solid, lifeless stone within a fraction of a second. He stepped back to the threshold of the cell, crossing his arms over his chest, and snapped his fingers. Time resumed. Thud. The bodies of Hiruzen Sarutobi and Danzo Shimura went completely limp, their eyes dulling into an empty, vacant glaze as they collapsed against the stone walls and the cot. There was no blood, no dramatic final words, and no explosion of chakra. The final two architects of Konoha's darkest era had been executed in the absolute dark, snuffed out like cheap candles by the very bloodlines they had spent their lives trying to harvest. System announcement, quest complete, the annihilation of the Konoha 4. Final status, all targets confirmed dead. The old political structure has been 100% erased from the Hidden Leaf Village. Grand Overlord prestige gained, SSS rank. The village populace has completely transitioned into absolute submission to the Uchiha lineage. Ren looked down at the two cold corpses for a final moment before turning his back in the cell. His body began to ripple and distort, twisting into the violent, silent vortex of his Kamui spatial distortion. Your history is over, old men, Ren's final words echoed through the empty vault as his form vanished into thin air. Tomorrow, the new era begins. And the world will learn to watch its step under the shadow of the sovereign. With a soft, violent rustle of wind, the cell fell into a dead, eternal silence, leaving behind nothing but the cold stone walls and the empty shells of the men who had once ruled the world from the dark.